Good morning. Welcome to the December meeting of the Environment and Sustainable Communities Committee. I'd like to begin by welcoming those members of the public and press who've joined us in Huntington in person today, and also those who are watching online live or later on the YouTube channel. The Combined Authority allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so feel free to take pictures and use social media during the meeting. I probably will be as well. Can I ask, though, that everyone turns their mobile phones to silent? I'm going to check mine. Yes. There are no fire drills scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, I will adjourn the meeting and we will all move to the muster point, which is in the High Street. And I would remind members and officers that this meeting will be recorded. Can I check with Joe? Do we have any apologies for today?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we have apologies from Tim Jones, the Business Board representative. And from the Chair, Richard Smith.
We send our best wishes to the Chair. She's not able to join us today. A second item on the agenda is declarations of interest. So do any of the members of the committee wish to declare disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest in any of the items on our agenda? Okay, I'm going to take that silence as none to disclose. But as always, you can stop the meeting at any point if you discover there's an interest that you would like to make known. Previous committee. So we last met on the 25th of October, and the wording of the minutes are in the agenda. Were there any questions on the accuracy of the minutes from last time? Okay, I see no objections, so we'll take the minutes as approved. And then the action log as well. Anyone have any comments on the action log? Okay, I'll take that as no comments or changes that need to be actioned. Okay. Should I sign them now? I'll sign them after. Can I check if we have any public questions?
No, none have been received.
Okay. For those online and watching or watching back later, I would encourage members of the public to submit public questions. There are instructions on how to do that on the Combined Authorities website. We really value the input of the public and the topics that they want to bring to our attention. Item 5 on the agenda is the forward plan. So this is the forward plan for the Combined Authority as a whole, not just for our committee. That's item 5 in your agenda. I hope you've had time to have a look at that. Are there any questions or comments on the forward plan for the Combined Authority? This is going to be a very quick meeting. Okay, I will take that as we've noted the Combined Authorities forward plan without any comments from the committee. That brings us to item 6. This is Water Resources East. Oh, great. We've got Daniel Johns online, who's going to join us. Welcome, Daniel, the Managing Director of Water Resources East. And he's going to be giving us a presentation. And then after the presentation, we'll have some time for members to ask him questions. Go ahead. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to give you an update. As you've already introduced me, I'm Daniel Johns. I'm Managing Director of Water Resources East. I've got a short presentation, I think about 10 minutes, and then I think 10 minutes for a bit of a discussion afterwards. I'm just going to try and share my slides. Hopefully this is going to work. I think I've now got permission to do that. If you can just bear with me. I hope now that you can see my slides.
Great, thank you. Yes, we can see.
Fantastic. Okay, so I'm just going to briefly cover, so in the 10 minutes I've got, a quick introduction, recap on Water Resources East. To To summarise again, our regional water resources plan for the east of England that we published last year, that's our kind of core role, but also looking more locally, the work of the Cambridge Water Scarcity Group, which is very much underway, working directly for government as a kind of shared partnership, trying to address the water scarcity pressures on Cambridge and Greater Cambridgeshire. Also, given it's a year since we published our regional plan, we're going to be publishing a first progress report against that regional plan in January. So hoping to give you a sneak preview into what some of those findings will be when we publish that next report in January. And that covers both demand side action and all the investment going into strategic and supply side schemes. And then finally, also just to kind of mention the role of nature-based solutions and a set of trials that WRE is being funded by government to take forward. So hopefully Water Resources East is not new to members of the committee, but just in case, just a quick recap, we are an independent not-for-profit membership organisation, and we are set up as that as one of 5 regional water resources groups that operate under the National Framework for Water Resources. So that's a kind of national strategy for addressing water scarcity across England and the Welsh borders. And the 5 regional groups work with water companies, they work with agriculture, they work with industry and energy and the other sectors to come up with these kind of multi-sector regional plans. And that's what we published for the first time last December. But also just to recognise that our board consists of those kind of multi-sector, kind of cross-sector representatives, including local councils, an energy company, a developer, the 4 water companies in the region, plus environmental stakeholders and the Association of Drainage Authorities, and to recognise Judith and Adrian as our key contacts from the combined authority as members of Water Resources East's board. We also, as a membership organisation, have more than 200 now members. We welcomed our 200th member in October. Membership is free, and we encourage many people interested in water resources and the solutions to tackle it to join us and to take part in our meetings. And it was actually our annual general meeting just yesterday. So just cracking on into the regional plan, we published it last December. It's available on our website. And what it said essentially was that if we do nothing, if we roll forward for the next 25 years through to 2050, then we end up on the left-hand side of the chart, which is really quite significant pressures on water scarcity. And as a consequence of that, continuing pressures on growth, particularly in pressures on the environment, particularly in the changing climate. So none of us are going to achieve our ambitions for kind of growth, for housing development, for environmental improvement, for agricultural production, for transitioning to the net zero economy, because there just won't be enough water around to allow that. But what our regional plan did was it set out a set of schemes and investments on the right hand side, starting with demand management and leakage control, but then very quickly getting into the supply side schemes that we need to be able to address that supply and demand deficit. And we're talking about major transfer schemes, moving water around the region. We're talking about reusing water and capturing as much as possible, storing much more water in the landscape, because that is really part of the problem. We've got plenty of water in the east, we just don't have enough storage to make best use of it. And in the longer term, things like desalination plants on the east coast particularly, because you quite quickly run out of water in the environment, particularly if we want to restore river systems and good ecology. You need to find new sources of water, and desalination is the only kind of scalable option that's available to parts of the world like the east of England. But why is Cambridge such a focus in recent times on this kind of water scarcity, on these water pressures? Well, kind of 2 things. First of all, it's the part of the country and part of the region where you've got the most kind of acute pressures on the environment coming through because of the health of chalk rivers in particular. So it's the part of the region that needs the biggest reductions in existing water use and abstraction. So that's what the right hand side chart says. But on the left hand side, that's kind of summary of all the media stories in the last few years, which kind of point to the level of ambition for growth within Cambridgeshire, not just on the housing side, but also on the commercial side, research hospitals, research parks, data centres, lots of water intensive new businesses and economic uses coming forward, taking more than the amount of water that was certainly predicted back in 2019 when the last round of regional plans were produced and published by water companies. So massive amounts of growth, some of the highest level rates of growth in the country, but also some of the most severe pressures on the environment that we just need to resolve as quickly as we can. WRE was commissioned by government early this year to add to the regional plan projections to say, well, if we get all this additional growth beyond the existing kind of local plan that's been adopted by the Shared Planning Service, by South Cambs, the city, and actually across the whole region. So if we go beyond local plans as they currently are set out toward the ambitions that were set out by the previous government under the Case for Cambridge, how much additional water would you need? And the answer is we would need about 50% more water than Cambridge Water is currently anticipating being able to deliver through its water resources management plan. 50% more water, that's a huge amount of water. That's up to 60 million litres of water per day would need to be found to meet those highest levels of growth. And there's limited ability within Cambridgeshire itself to find that amount of water. Because Cambridge Water is already rolling out smart metering, they've already got the kind of tightest targets for leakage. They're already funding, or they're planning to fund behaviour change campaigns and all kinds of other measures, including the Grafham transfer we're talking about, including the Fens reservoir we're talking about. So over and above all the investment that Cambridge Water already anticipating, we need to find 50% more water. And that water cannot be found in Cambridgeshire. It has to be found elsewhere within the region, and involving, say, desal plants, water reuse, and therefore bulk supply of water from outside of Cambridgeshire into Cambridgeshire. So over the next 10 to 15 years, as a minimum, Cambridge is going to go from largely being self-sufficient for water, taking water from the Chalk Aquifer, to basically being almost entirely sufficient on inward transfers of water from the surrounding area, particularly from Anglian Water's region. So in response, the previous government, and has now been backed up by new ministers, launched a joint statement between the Planning Authority, the Environment Agency, between government, working with the water companies back in March to say, well, how are we going to address these pressures on growth? And there's a whole list of things on this screen, from obviously, first of all, adopting and endorsing Cambridge Water's Water Resources Management Plan for the next kind of starting from April next year. Funded for the next 5 years, hopefully, when the final determinations on water company business plans are published next Thursday. But looking ahead to 2050 in terms of the level of investment needed over the long term. So the first step is to hopefully see Cambridge Water's Water Resources Management Plan approved by government, either just before Christmas or probably just after. But then the strategic supply side schemes, making sure those do come through to the timetable we need, particularly the Grafham transfer, which will move water from Anglian Water's Grafham Water Reservoir through to Bury St Edmunds, dropping off water in Cambridge Water's zone on the way, and the Fens Reservoir by 2036. We're also looking again at other kind of smaller scale options that might be able to plug some gaps should they emerge. I'll talk again later on about nature-based solutions. Do they have a role to play in the upper catchment to help support the environment, increase base flows? We're working with planning authorities, and actually planning authorities already have the ability to negotiate tighter water efficiency standards with new housing developments. And we're seeing some really good examples of that now taking place, particularly with the Cambridge Research Hospital, where they've agreed, the tighter standards of kind of water efficiency, and as part of the BREEAM Excellent standard, and water audits for the whole of the Addenbrooke estate, regular reporting of their progress on those kind of water strategies to the Cambridge Water Scarcity Group. So there's lots of things that planning authorities can now do with the flexibility provided by government to negotiate tighter standards with individual developers. And probably you've seen there's stories in the press about creating a water credit market, which would deliver water efficiency savings over and above Cambridge Water's Water Resources Management Plan, creating headroom within plans so that new developments beyond the existing local plan can go ahead. And because we've got the ear of government through the Cambridge water scarcity process, making sure, championing the need for new national policy, these two key ones in particular, around introducing water efficiency labels on taps, showers, toilets, washing machines, so you can see if a washing machine is A rated or if it's G rated, hopefully by the end of next year, and also on a national basis to tighten water efficiency standards in new development, so that we are designing homes to use as little potable water as possible, and replacing potable water sources of water with things like rainwater harvesting, water butts, potentially grey water recycling as well. Our progress report, as I said, is going to come out next month in mid-January. A quick sneak preview of some of the charts we'll be producing, because I think it tells quite a positive story of progress, certainly in the last couple of years, by water companies across the east of England and by Cambridge Water in particular. So on the right-hand side, this is progress toward the statutory national water saving target as dictated by the Environment Act. So the Environment Act says what are the national kind of environmental targets, and the one for water is about reducing the amount of potable water used per person across the country. And the target by 2038 is a 20% reduction against a baseline set in 2019-2020. And you can see on the left-hand side, we are tracking, obviously years, there are years where consumption is slightly higher, slightly slower, slightly lower, but including leakage, including non-household consumption as well as household consumption, so all uses of the public water supply, we are generally tracking in the direction at the right trajectory needed to meet the 2038 statutory target. And if you look at just household consumption on the right-hand side, again, fluctuation and variations in years, and what it shows is there was that really big peak in household water consumption during the COVID lockdown years as people all came home and started using water, and we had that fantastic kind of blue skies and hot spring and summer, if you remember, so massive amounts of water use within the home during that period. But that COVID peak has passed, that water companies have got on top of that and moved things back on the trajectory that we will need to meet the long-term national target of per capita water use of 110 litres per person per day. So good progress on these kind of key metrics. You'll probably see also that simultaneously water companies are individually struggling against some of their regulatory targets. So whilst like leakage is falling, it's not falling quite at the rate that regulators would like it to, but nevertheless overall it's a relatively positive story to tell on the demand side. And as I mentioned, we've already seen a lot of the schemes that we need within the regional plan to fill the long-term supply-demand gap starting to come into practice. The Fens Reservoir is an absolutely critical scheme for Cambridge, Cambridgeshire and the wider region. 50 billion litres of water storage, a £2 billion capex project. And just in this year, we've had a second round of public consultation launched by Anglian Water and Cambridge Water. We've now got agreement that Anglian Water will take the kind of lead in terms of funding and financing the project. And the Secretary of State, in approving Anglian Water's Water Resources Management Plan, said that he is satisfied essentially that the case for the reservoir, its location, its size, has been robustly demonstrated. So that helps kind of narrow, hopefully, the development consent order process, because that part of the case has been made, so we can just focus in on the greater detail. And the planning inspector at that pre-development stage has already begun. So Anglian Water, the project team, submitted a scoping report, and the planning inspector published their scoping opinion just a week or two ago. A very detailed document, but that was on the back of some consultation, perhaps with the Combined Authority, but some of the other districts and other local authorities involved in the project. And just lastly, just to add, I say nature-based solutions from our perspective are a really key part of the overall kind of toolkit. If we can preserve the environment, if we can store water in the upper ground and use quite low tech technologies, buffer strips and leaky dams, these runoff attenuation features are cheap to implement. But what we're doing is not only delivering the schemes, but putting in a lot of monitoring equipment so we can establish exactly how much water does get stored in the landscape and recharged to the aquifer. Because obviously we need lots of these, but the only way we're going to get lots of these is by demonstrating that they work and building it into the evidence base used by water companies and the Environment Agency for investing and allocating funding to particular types of projects. So we can demonstrate the case with nature-based solutions. We create a means by which hopefully we can scale up their investment from multiple sources across the region. And it's tied to the water credit market. So if there is a water credit market that develops, then hopefully some of that funding could go into nature-based solutions, which not only work for water resources, but also deliver against biodiversity, soil, carbon, and all these other benefits and opportunities that we want to see. And the first, we've got landowners on board. We're starting to develop designs, monitoring strategies. We hope to start baseline monitoring this winter and then construct the first of these schemes next spring. So that's hopefully a very quick overview. I haven't talked about agriculture. I haven't really talked about green hydrogen. I've not talked a huge about non-household growth, but there's so much going on. There's too much to pack into 10 minutes, but hopefully that was a useful update and very, looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Daniel. I agree. This is such a large topic. Thanks for focusing our mind on it. I see some hopeful statistics there, but also some that concern me quite a lot. I'll probably come through with that on a question. But do members have questions for Daniel? Councillor Gooderl.
Am I on? Yeah. Thank you, Daniel, for your presentation. Have you ever looked into using grey water in households for flushing the toilets? Because it seems to me a waste of money, putting purified water down the toilet. And it's a way of saving money and, like you say, the use saving potable water as well, and the use of it in the household.
Yes, we have looked at it and we encourage it. We kind of need to wean ourselves off using potable water for, say, flushing toilets, hosing down the patio, washing cars, and watering our gardens. There's a regulatory barrier though that the government is planning to address, which says that if a water company is supplying water to a household, it has to be of wholesome quality. So at the moment, water companies are prevented from supplying non-potable quality water to households, which you would need to be able to do to have kind of dual supply pipework. So what we want to see is new homes built with that kind of dual supply pipework. You would have to color code those pipes to make sure people knew what was potable, what was not potable. And we'd also need to make sure that the kind of plumbers and the householders themselves understand exactly what water should be used for what. Because the Drinking Water Inspectorate, quite rightly, is quite concerned that gets lost at some point and people start to tap into the non-potable supply and connect up their kitchen tap, or when they redo the bathroom they say use that grey water. But certainly it hasn't got going at scale because of these regulatory challenges, but it's definitely something that needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Chair. You can hear. Thanks. I'm Councillor Day representing Peterborough. I know the presentation's been on the Greater Cambridgeshire area, or the Greater Cambridge area. Does that include Peterborough, and are they the same issues for Peterborough? I imagine there probably are. I wondered also if Peterborough City Council are a partner, because I chair the Climate Change and Environment Committee at Peterborough, and we haven't come across your organisation. And sorry, there's a couple of questions here, but we're developing our local plan that's emerging at the moment. And I just wondered, what advice would you give to councils in terms of water scarcity whilst they're developing sites for new house builds and on their emerging local plans? Thank you.
Well, thank you. Yes. So first of all, Peterborough itself isn't on our board, but through the Combined Authorities membership, then of course, Peter will be represented. But Peterborough City Council itself is very willing, for free, to become a Water Resources East member and therefore be invited to annual general meetings and other kind of quarterly webinars. Peterborough, as a fast-growing city, will have its own challenges. Definitely, water scarcity will be an issue that needs to be addressed. But I think what's brought Cambridge, the kind of crosshairs have fallen on Cambridge because of the Environment Agency beginning to object to individual new housing developments. And the Cancer Research Hospital. And I'm not aware that Peterborough is quite at that level, but certainly that doesn't mean that it could end up in that position if these kind of water scarcity pressures aren't managed. So just in terms of the local plan, so our regional plan is based on existing adopted local plans, the level of housing and non-household growth that we expect within those plans. We know through the government's new housing targets, the refresh of local plans, your growth ambitions are likely to rise. But in developing your local plan, I say, as a planning authority, use the flexibility you now have to set a tighter water efficiency target on new development. So the existing building regulations allows you to adopt the tighter standard of 110 litres per person per day. But a new development in and around Cambridge, they're talking now more about 85 to 90 litres per person per day. And that's likely to be where building regulations will end up in when kind of reviewed in 2025, published in 2026, it will probably set a trajectory toward kind of 80 to 85, if not 90 litres per person per day within the next 10, 15 years. But there's nothing now to stop a planning authority adopting a much tighter standard and including on non-household development, adopting that kind of BREEAM excellent standard with water credits, which start to take you down that kind of grey water recycling, rainwater harvesting route.
I do. Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. Obviously, the name of the organisation is Water Resources East. Obviously, water is a resource. During the course of the presentation, I was sort of minded to think, where does the very important work of internal drainage boards, the middle level commissioners, particularly relevant to Cambridge and Peterborough, come in? Acknowledging that as a group of organisations, they are absolutely at the heart of keeping our county safe from the risk of flooding. As an organisations, I'm regularly told that they are under increasing pressure due to the amount of water falling in the catchment area and then becoming essentially stuck in the bowl that is Cambridgeshire, and then having to pump it out and increasing challenges. I realise that the reservoir, which may solve many problems with regard to what you highlighted in the south about restricted growth, but obviously filling that reservoir, as I understand, is often linked to the work of the internal drainage boards. And I'm keen to understand, where does Water Resources East, and knowing that the Combined Authority obviously is a member of the organisation, have we set a position as Water Resources East to acknowledge the importance of the internal drainage boards and how we future plan their important role going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, the Association of Drainage Authorities has a seat on our board. So a member of the Water Management Alliance has a seat around the board table. And I guess when it comes to the middle level commissioners and the Association of Drainage Authorities more generally, we absolutely support their policy position that IDB should become kind of water resources as well as kind of flood risk management authorities, so that they should have the license, they should have the powers and potentially funding to manage the kind of the scarcity of water resources, as well as, alongside their duties to maintain navigation and to maintain water levels. When it comes to the specifics, we're working with the mid-level commissioners, Ely Group of drainage boards, and obviously of things like the Environment Agency, WWT, environmental stakeholders, water companies, as part of the Fens Water Partnership. So WRE organises the Fens Water Partnership. I chair it. In fact, there's a meeting tomorrow. And what that's about is making sure that as the reservoir project gets delivered, we're thinking about it as a system. So how does the Fens Reservoir interact with the mid-level commissioners' pumping systems and its own ambitions for water level management? How can we make sure the water within the catchment is used to best effect? And one of the things commissioned under that partnership is an integrated water management study for the Fens landscape, which shows very clearly that when the water is being used for the Fens Reservoir, that means that the middle level commissioners are not going to have to pump so much out into the North Sea. So they've been, as I say, they've been pumping massive amounts of water over the last few wet winters. That suggests there is plenty of water to fill the reservoir, but having that additional storage will, and that has been quantified, reduce the amount for pumping, therefore reducing their energy bills, reducing their kind of costs for local authorities. So we are working very, very closely with middle-level commissioners, and I think there's lots of opportunities to think about the Fens landscape as a system, with the ADA and their boards as a key part of that.
Thank you, Daniel. I'll jump in with a question at this point. You mentioned that in our region we have a very ambitious reduction plan of the water use per person, which is required because of the growth that's in all of our local plans added together. Yet you also said that given the growth ambitions of the previous government and the current government, we would need 50% more water to meet those ambitions. How does Water Resources East use its voice or its influence to identify and flag the caution required with such ambitious growth, given some of the planning applications you mentioned that have already been objected to?
Yeah. Well, we have no formal role in that planning process. So the Environment Agency is the kind of statutory consultee, and they lodge their objections. But what we're doing is a commission by government is to look again at where water might come from in order to meet the ambitions for growth. And the non-negotiable here is environmental improvement. So as part of the Cambridge Water Scarcity Group, as part of our work, at no point do we say that the environment should be compromised in order to meet the level of growth. That's what we've done in the past. That's kind of why we're in the mess that we're in now. So the way forward is obviously to deliver our regional plan, to have the Cambridge Water Resources Management Plan approved as quickly as possible, and then to scale the plan by bringing in these new sources of water, most likely from desalination in the short term. And the good news is that Ofwat, as part of their initial determination of business plans in the summer, these are water company business plans, they allowed, I think, it's about £50 million for Anglian Water to start to develop the first of those desal plants at Bacton on the North Norfolk coast. And you might think, well, North Norfolk is miles away from Cambridgeshire, but because we're now planning and delivering infrastructure on a regional scale, giving more water to Anglian Water in North Norfolk, they might be able to back off some of their abstraction from elsewhere in the region and transfer more water to Cambridge. So it will be kind of a consequence of more water in the the east of the region on the east coast, allowing Anglian Water to supply Cambridge Water with more water from elsewhere.
You mentioned, Daniel, that you're not a statutory consultee on planning applications, but as an organization, do you take a role and comment on applications?
Not at the scale of individual applications, no. So the scale at which we operate at, particularly because we are a small team, we're going to be welcoming our 10th member only in January. But so we just don't have the resources to comment on individual applications. But we operate at that kind of catchment and regional scale with the water companies, who do then obviously comment on individual applications, and working very closely with the Environment Agency that has a statutory consultee role.
I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to jump in with another question. So similarly, will you be taking a role of commenting on local growth plans of the regions as they develop in the months to come?
That's a great question. We've not been kind of active in this space for long enough through the last round of regional plans. I think, can I take that one away? Because it's not something we considered, but clearly we should, particularly given some of the housing growth numbers that are coming out as a consequence of the new mandatory targets and the funding formula, so the house building formula that the government is proposing does lead to quite significant increases on the kind of historic rate of housing growth in parts of Essex, for example. I don't think it has such a big implications for Cambridgeshire because you're already planning on large increases in housing growth. But yeah, that's a really interesting question, which I'll take away.
Is going to come in at this point as well.
Thank you, Dan. So I was just going to add to that. So as you'll be aware, and we'll probably talk about the local growth plan later in this meeting as well, there's a kind of dimension of it which is very much about how we support sectors to grow, and then there's another dimension of it which is about how we respond to the constraints such as connectivity, water, power, etc. And one of the things we have done in order to make sure that that part of the emerging local growth plan is informed is ensured that the Executive Director of Economy and Growth, Richard Kenny, who is leading the local growth plan, has engaged with Dan and his team to make sure the evidence is there, alongside indeed Maxine and the Greater South East Net Zero Hub, to make sure that he's considering local area energy plans and the energy side as well. What we haven't done yet, but need to focus on going into the next year, is developing that further, thinking about the activities that might be supported in the local growth plan rather than the general objectives, and in particular, as I think we did reference in October, thinking about the sustainability of all of that. And that is clearly really important, and that is, I think, where engagement with organisations like Water Resources East will be really important going into the new year. So I would say we haven't done it yet. We've laid the base there, and we will need to build on that in the early in 2025. And I would say that Adrian has represented CPCA at the Board of Water Resources East, and because we recognise the importance of this to this region, then I will be talking with Dan about the possibility of my joining the Water Resources East Board to make sure that we've got a really important voice at that table. So hopefully that's useful for the committee to be aware of.
So Daniel, one more question for me. Judith mentioned industry. So as we think about supporting growth of industry in our region, which industries are the most water intensive?
It's a great question. So, well, first of all, there's some fantastic data sets available on the Mosel website. So Mosel is the market operator for the non-household kind of water using sector. I think so, for example, Addenbrooke's is the biggest single non-household user of water within the Cambridge water region. And that's why it's important as part of the Cancer Research Hospital, they're doing a kind of full site water audit and with regular reporting to the Water Scarcity Group. I think people are most concerned about kind of research laboratories, which can be very water intensive, and also data centers, which increasingly using artificial intelligence have to be, the processes of working harder, more intensively to be able to process those artificial intelligence applications. And data centers also have to be quite closely located to their center where the users are, because otherwise the latency and the speeds just don't work. So there's lots of work going on that we're supporting with the government to look at these water intensive industries and are means by which, again, to kind of wean them off potable water, because in the past that's been the cheapest and easiest solution for cooling. But in the future, we can't have massive AI data centers just kind of using potable water for cooling their processes. So lots of work going underway, but yeah, research laboratories, artificial intelligence applications, things like hospitals, are probably where also, in terms of existing buildings, some of the biggest water savings can be found.
Given your answer, I would recommend you cast your eye over Hinchinbrook Hospital, where the mayor works, but also where they're starting to begin their plans for redevelopment, and I'm sure they would value your input.
No, very pleased to help.
I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to say thank you to Daniel for joining us today and filling us in on Water Resources East. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we also have Megan Hudson here, who's joined us from Fenland Soil. She's the environmental lead and general manager for Fenland Soil. Megan, if you tell us a bit about Fenland Soil, and then we'll leave some time for members to ask questions at the end as well. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Is that one working? Brilliant. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So yeah, I'm Megan Hudson. I'm general manager of Fenland Soil. I think I've met a few of you before. But Fenland Soil was set up with some support from the CPCA in 2021, April 2021, in response to not only the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Independent Commission on Climate Change, but also to the recent findings in the sixth carbon budget that were basically kind of reporting that, you know, our massive expanse of peat soils across the Cambridgeshire Fens is an issue, particularly in terms of our fight towards net zero. And there was quite a stark statistic within the CPCA report that found that about 40% of our sort of total emissions from Cambridgeshire were coming from agricultural land use on our peat soil. So it's a massive statistic. And in terms of how lowland peat contributes to sort of the potential for carbon storage, but also at the moment to carbon emissions within the UK is a massive issue that Fenland Soil was set up directly to address. So back in 2021, we started with 8 core farmer members and a range of other stakeholders that had come together basically to discuss all of these issues and look at how we can tackle these problems related to land use on the Cambridgeshire Fens. Obviously, we were faced with the fact that we've got these really high emissions, but it's also a really complicated picture because agriculture in East Anglia is really highly productive. About 40% of the UK's fresh vegetables are grown in the Fens, and about 1 in 6 people within the Fenland area are employed somewhere from farm to fork. So it's a massive employer and it's a massively important part of our rural economy. So we kind of knew that this was going to be a really complex challenge, and actually one that we needed to tackle quite holistically to make sure that we were bringing together all of the relevant stakeholders to really tackle this as a whole, and kind of make sure that nobody got left behind in terms of creating a transition. So Fenland Soil was set up officially as an organisation in April 2021, kind of based on a few sort of months of kind of coming together on a more ad hoc basis, and it brought together farmers, researchers, policymakers, NGOs, landowners, and all other kind of important stakeholders within this debate to start addressing the challenge and shaping a sustainable future. We rebranded later in 2021 as Fenland Soil from the Fenland Peat Committee, just to make sure basically that we were actually a little bit more accessible to Fenland farmers, and that Fenland farmers could identify with the organisation, and it kind of created a little bit more it created a little bit more of a presence for farms across the Fens who might not necessarily identify themselves as being peatland farmers, because that was another challenge that we came up across. So our mission really was to kind of unlock these solutions for managing lowland peat sustainably and reducing carbon emissions, whilst also safeguarding productivity as a major asset for the area. So we're built around the 4 pillars of sustainability, opportunity, innovation, and learning, hence soil. And our challenges really are looking at building whole farm policies to mitigate climate change. So not just looking at kind of what we do on a field basis, not just kind of looking at kind of what we do in terms of managing water tables and things like that, but actually looking at how that operates across a whole farm business plan. We're looking at how we can create positive opportunities for farms. So not only kind of looking at mitigating this change, but also looking at how we can create opportunities within that to make sure that these farms thrive going into the future. We're looking for new approaches to sort of manage the way to sort of look at the way that we manage peat and the way that we farm in the fens. There's ways that we can change and address farming differently to provide new solutions. So we're looking into ways that we can actually use innovations and particularly engineering innovations to look at addressing some of these challenges. And we're also massively working with farms to facilitate peer learning and sort of look at really making sure that the industry is having these conversations with academia and with policymakers to kind of make sure that we're addressing stuff as a whole. So since we formed in 2021, what have we actually delivered? So in terms of our actual delivery, we have leveraged an additional £1.1 million in funding to help carry out crucial projects. And that started with our Discovery Grant project back in 2021, where we developed an initial methodology for opportunity mapping for peatland management in the fens. And this opportunity mapping process basically works with farmers to use their knowledge as local experts to just have conversations around what their soil is like, what their agricultural productivity is like, and how their hydrology works, to allow us to look for opportunities to change the way that we manage land on a more patchwork basis. We work doing this on a drainage board scale and initially mapped 3 drainage boards, which delivered around 13,000 hectares of mapping. And what it basically meant is that because farms had some ownership and some sort of agency over the maps that were created, we were naturally identifying pockets of peatland within the fens that were suitable for changing management without necessarily compromising production, because it was looking at those areas that were particularly problematic to manage and self-selecting and self-identifying those and basically creating these pockets of opportunity within the landscape without compromising the rest of the farming system. So following on from that Discovery Grant project, we were awarded a project under Natural England's Blue Culture Exploration Fund. As part of that, we expanded this mapping to a further 4 drainage boards. So that increased our mapped area by a further 28,000 hectares. We also hosted and worked with one of our farming partners to deliver the UK's largest wet farming trial. So wet farming is a major tactic that we can use basically to manage our peat better and still maintain productivity. And on the whole, most of these projects have been covered by conservation organisations. So we wanted to carry out a project as a farm and basically do this from a more commercial point of view to ensure that basically the work that we were delivering was going to be commercially viable and commercially sensible. So we carried out this trial. We used 2 food crops, so celery and Chinese leaf cabbage, both of which are grown conventionally in the fens anyway. And we tested both of these in terms of their agronomic potential to grow under these wet conditions. The trial was largely successful. We did see the crops harvested. So we saw about a 50% yield on our Chinese leaf cabbage, which is far higher than expected because it's not a wetland crop and therefore wasn't expected to perform perfectly under the wet conditions. And in terms of actual sort of real yield, all of those heads of Chinese leaf cabbage grew. It was a quality issue that meant that we kind of saw a 50% marketable yield, which is a separate issue to get into in terms of how specs work. But basically, it kind of showed that there is some potential in this wet farming practice, but it needs a great deal of fine tuning in terms of making it more viable and more successful in terms of harvest, because we did have to switch to a hand harvest practice, which is a lot more difficult and a lot more expensive basically than our conventional rigs harvest system. So it did massively increase production costs, but it did identify sort of where the blockers and where the barriers are in terms of using this technique moving forward. So moving further on, we also last year were awarded earlier this year were awarded a project from the Environment Agency under the Agricultural Peat Water Discovery Pilot. As part of this, we expanded our mapping further and moved to a new area within the fen. So we've we've kind of most of our mapping in the past has focused on the south level and middle level, and we've moved kind of up towards closer to Peterborough in terms of our mapping there. So further up into the middle level catchment rather than along the washes. And in those areas, we've been working with completely new farms that haven't kind of been exposed to this issue surrounding lowland peat, and some of the deepest areas of peat in the fens. And it's allowing us to further map the opportunity and work with a couple of farms there that are actively looking to do some peatland restoration and rewetting, which has been largely successful and obviously quite exciting in terms of working with some farms actively wanting to be proactive and do stuff. We've also carried out a hydrological study, so understanding there's a lot of kind of conversations around rewetting peat, making peat wetter, and it's this hydrological study is basically about understanding how different types of peat and peat at different levels of degradation will perform when we put water back into it. So that will allow us to better understand things like how much water it's actually going to take to increase water levels across the fens, and what it will mean in terms of flood risk, in terms of managing water for a farm twist system, and a kind of a load of other aspects like that basically are kind of the complicated soil physics side of kind of understanding rewetting. We've done a catchment case study up in the Axley level on the Pigwater catchment, which is a key water course in terms of moving water into the middle level. It's an area that's experienced quite a lot of pinch points in the past. So by delivering this catchment study, we hope that it will greatly improve water conveyance and water facilitation into this catchment, which will have benefits for peatland restoration. So that catchment includes the Great Fen, so it will hopefully greatly improve the water availability for the Great Fen, but also for agricultural projects going on in that area as well. So that's a really exciting project which is just coming to a close at the moment. We've also done, as part of the Lowland Agricultural Peat Water Discovery Pilot, a large amount of work on ditches, which we've identified as one of the key opportunities for biodiversity net gain across the Fenland area. We are carrying out some case study work, both in terms of better understanding hydrology of these ditches, particularly when they are there's enhanced management processes in place, and also the benefits for biodiversity, with a view of producing a white paper that will help provide the evidence for ditches to be more widely included in SFI options going forward, which will encourage more farms to take them up across the Fenland area. So that is also an exciting piece of work that we'll be reporting on in January, that is seeing kind of a lot of progress. So in terms of more sort of general core activity outside of our sort of project funding, we've seen our farmer outreach and engagement increase massively. So from those 8 original farms that we were working with, we've now got more than 45 farming members as part of Fenland Soil. We produced a major economic report in April of this year, which identified some of the challenges for farm viability in terms of making changes going forward. And it basically looked at quantifying how much it would change farming systems to switch from the current sort of business as usual operations to identifying and adopting some of these new measures. And it kind of looked at whether or not the current mitigations and current offerings in terms of finance to support this from government are actually viable or suitable, or whether we need to look at changing and addressing those. We've formed really strong partnerships with other lowland peat regions, so particularly in the northwest in Lancashire, where they've got very similar cropping to us, and in Somerset we've created really close partnerships with those 2 areas of the UK, which has been really positive for creating a more united voice in terms of lowland peat agriculture, to make sure that we've got some sort of common voice and common goal. We're really becoming the voice on lowland agricultural peat, and leading the way in terms of finding these solutions. So we've got really strong connections now with the DEFRA teams that work on lowland peat. We've had articles in major farming media, so in the Farmers Guardian and Farmers Weekly, which has helped the message spread out to a lot more farms. We had an article in the Times earlier this year, which was really positive as well, and in Tom Heap's new book Landsmock, we're quite heavily featured in his chapter on lowland peat as well. In terms of sort of wider benefits, we've created 3 more full-time roles within Fenland Soil as well. So we've massively increased the team and hosted 3 interns over the summer as well. So we've helped upskill 3 students who were kind of in between their 2nd and 3rd years of university, and provided them with a lot more of a skill set in terms of working in environmental roles. We also hosted our major conference event in 2023, which saw 220 attendees and again garnered some major media attention. There's been a huge amount of joining up since that conference, and it really brought together the farming industry and academia and policymakers, and basically facilitated a lot of conversations that wouldn't normally happen because those attendees wouldn't normally be in the same room talking to each other. So it was a hugely important event in terms of bringing the industry and academia together and making sure that research going forward is actually a lot more sensible and a lot more holistic and bringing together a lot of these challenges. And we are hosting our next conference in January, so in just a few weeks, which again we're hoping to see similar attendance, and kind of looking at the progress we've made in the last couple of years and what we need to do next in terms of filling some of the major gaps in lowland peat research. In terms of what else is coming next, we are currently in the process of re-looking at our flux tower network. So at the moment we are operating on a baselining sort of exercise. So we're looking at how emissions vary based on different soil types. Moving forward, we'll be looking to twin those systems and operate sort of paired control and intervention trials, which will be able to start allow us to start looking into how mitigations are actually performing in terms of greenhouse gas balance. So it's kind of evolving that research from the baselining phase that we're in now to help assist with setting sort of national targets into actually testing how these mitigations are performing in real life systems. So that's kind of how things are going to move forward. In terms of other contributions we're making, the England peat map is currently being produced, and the data that we're collecting as part of our mapping work is feeding into that directly and helping make sure that that is actually accurate for the fens, because there's been a few issues with their modelling that has basically meant that it hasn't performed overly well in Fenland because it's behaves differently to how the model predicts because it's been so badly altered by human activity. So we're contributing the results are accurate across fens. We'll also be shifting to focus a lot of our research on our skirt soils or organomineral soils across the fens, basically looking at what we can do to preserve lowland peat and reduce emissions where rewetting isn't possible, because there's a large area of fens where it isn't going to be realistic and achievable. So we're focusing a lot of our work now on how we can kind of reduce emissions in those areas. So whether it be regenerative farming techniques, whether it be using amendments, whether it kind of be managing with irrigation, we're looking at quite a few different opportunities that will hopefully reduce emissions and allow business as usual agriculture to continue at the same time. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Megan. Many of the members represent Fenland landscape, so I'm sure they'll have some questions for you. But I'll start off with one. You mentioned polluticulture and some of your trials that resulted in a 50% yield, but also had to use some hand harvesting. Mm-hmm. That sounds like a really big economic challenge for farmers. So I'm curious if you've looked at testing non-food items like materials, fibers that could be made into other things. Are you doing tests outside of just the edible markets?
Yeah, great question. So the answer to that is yes. So we are looking at some of the non-food options, but in terms of competing with the current gross margins that we see from growing our food crops, those crops just don't actually compete. So instead of maintaining current levels of productivity, trying to continue to grow food crops is a much more sensible option in terms of kind of keeping up with where we are at the moment. That being said, obviously we do need break crops within the rotation still, even if we move to a wetter farming system. So we are looking at what sort of options might be suitable to replace bioenergy crops. So whether or not we can wet farm some of those bioenergy crops that we see. So yes, we are looking at that. But in terms of the attractiveness to growers, food crops are the more attractive option at the moment.
Okay.
Incredible report. Thank you. You're doing so much work. You mentioned about your next conference in January. I just first of all wonder when the date of that was. And then you talked about the event being really useful in terms of networking between academia, policymakers and farmers themselves. What do you see as the challenges? Is there often a disconnect between those groups of people, and how do we sort of move forward? Obviously, your conferences are really helping and address that problem, but what often is the disconnect between those three sort of bodies of people and organisations?
Yeah, sure. So, first question, the conference is on the 28th and 29th of January, and that will be hosted at the Maltings in Ely. But I'm sure I can send around some information for that after the meeting, so we can pass that around. In terms of kind of the disconnect and the issues between academia and industry, I think honestly, in the past, it's been difficult for academia to connect with sort of wider groups than just a couple of sort of probably the larger agri-businesses who have got more sort of time to attend meetings, be part of research projects and things like that. So by having sort of these more broader networking events, and by having obviously cluster groups like Fen and Soil, and then sort of the smaller cluster groups within it, it's really helped in terms of creating a wider viewpoint that academia can pull from. It's also made sure that farms are working a lot more engaged and a lot more interested in working closely with academia. So they're now helping to design the trials, they're helping to kind of actually implement them, and by having that sort of greater sense of buy-in, these trials are actually being a lot more successful going forward, because where normally you'd kind of see issues, I mean, kind of an example is there's been issues where they've been trying to seal some polyculture trial work on another farm, and they kind of were trying to do things like put in plastic membranes and all that kind of stuff, and actually by having conversations with the farm, they realized that there was sort of natural features within the field that they could exploit to deliver the same results without having to put a load of plastic into the site. So it's those kind of and then there was other examples with farms kind of identifying more suitable areas for restoration by saying, actually, if you rework this field, it's going to open up a spring over here, so that's going to create a problem, so why don't we move into this one? And it's kind of been that ability to exploit local knowledge and can kind of have those conversations with local people that have delivered much wider benefits than what you typically see from project work in the past. So I think it's more about kind of creating that sense of trust as well, because they're all together, all in the same room, and they're actually being able to see each other pulling in the same direction rather than seeing stuff being enforced on them. So it's been a lot more powerful from that point of view.
I just ask one more thing. I just wondered as well, you've got 40, did you say 40 farms now?
45, yeah.
45 farms, yeah. That's incredible. And I wondered, from your perspective, with your knowledge, what would you like to see in the future in terms of upscaling? I mean, is there a potential with some of these? I mean, I know you probably can't say now because you need the results of the trials, but yeah, you know, from your perspective, what would be an ideal sort of target situation for you to sort of aim for?
Yeah, great question. So obviously one of our key targets is to increase farmer engagement. So we'd like to be working with more farms than what we are at the moment. So that's kind of something that we're working towards and I keep seeing progress on. So that's really positive. One of our big targets really is in terms of the mapping. So making sure that we can cover the entirety of the fens in terms of this opportunity mapping to get a really good picture. So for context, the target from central government is that they want to see 75% of lowland peat either restored or sustainably managed. At the moment, sustainable manage can only be rewetting, because that's the only thing that's been researched and has actually got enough data behind it to say, yes, this is actually concretely a solution to managing the lowland peat. So kind of being able to say whether or not that 75% target is actually realistic in the fens is going to be massively powerful, and also help us to hopefully redirect some of the funding into some of this further research that will help us understand some of the other mitigations as well. And then our other sort of big target really is sort of fully understanding some of these mitigations, so carrying out those farm trials at larger scale with flux towers to sort of measure and record them to make sure that we have got a really clear picture of actually how these different mitigations do deliver benefit.
Hello, nice to see you.
Hi.
Obviously, I've had the benefit of being out to see and work, and I'm very pleased that in this sort of 10 year we've been able to support Fenland Soil. Long may that continue. On the point you noted about the 29th of January, I'm just checking, we've actually got a reserve date for this very committee. So we may need to think, if there's an option that you have got a thing, we might be able to combine the two. I don't know. That's for the meeting. But to go to your work, your very well presented work, the report work that you're doing, my observation in what you've said is that obviously you've benefited from some of the support from the Combined Authority. You mentioned DEFRA. What I didn't hear was obviously you've got the buy-in of farmers, and on the ground that's going to be perhaps the most important thing. But I'm thinking, where's private capital here? Where is the money from bigger organizations coming in to help us or to help you solve these problems? I'm disappointed. And is that an observation you've seen? And what would you be recommending to us as a committee, or indeed as the mayor, who has supported you and see the work that you're doing? What we should be doing to lobby? Because governments put money in, local governments put money in, but am I missing something?
So great question. So what I probably have failed to mention is that we do also have corporate sponsors that are part of Fen and Soil. So they do help in terms of the sort of private financing of the work that we're doing. So we've got 14 corporate members that we work with. But obviously there's still quite a lot of big players that aren't necessarily at the table. There's a lot of conversations to be had around green finance that we're currently working on, and getting some support in terms of those much larger corporations, in terms of the ESG work. A lot of the work that Fen and Soil is doing will directly benefit those organisations. So we're in quite a lot of conversation at the moment to see if we can leverage some support from them.
And you've I mean, obviously that's great to hear, because you didn't mention them, so I'm grateful. What speed up, and if you that you've got more stuff, I want to kind of work with other partners. Is that something we can work together on?
It would definitely be something I'd be really keen to work together on. I think if we can do some work sort of showing the CPA backing in terms of the project, and get some of this wider support from these bigger organisations, that would be great. We are in the process actually of setting up a sort of side arm to Fen and Soil that has got charitable status, because we hope that will allow us to access some of the more philanthropic funding. So some of the bigger organisations and sort of bigger foundations that have got money for peatland research at the moment, we can't access because we're still a limited company. So we're creating that sort of arm of Fen and Soil to help us to be able to access some of those bigger funding pots as well. But it's definitely a conversation that I'd like to follow up on, because I think if there's work we can do to encourage some of this investment, it would be great.
A three-way between me, you, and my officers.
Yeah, perfect.
Right, good.
Thanks so much. Thanks for the presentation. I was just intrigued about the sort of bit linked to the previous item on water resources. A lot of debate, obviously ongoing debate about runoff from agricultural land, pesticides, and compromising water resources. So I'm just wondering how much of a ongoing culture change there is, especially amongst the farming community, in terms of the work you're doing, the buy-in you mentioned from the 45 farms, and how much that is going to be used to persuade other farmers, given the remarks about capacity, of course, within your own organisation. That is the way forward in order to encourage the farming community to really, really engage with the work you're doing, and farming and the mitigation of the negative effects in terms of water resources, just apply that far more successfully in the future. I'm just interested about the culture change. Is that still ongoing, I imagine?
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, there is a need for a massive culture shift, and that is ongoing. But we are kind of largely seeing that actually, once we get in farms, we have these conversations, they get it fairly quickly. I mean, sort of no farm is wanting to actively destroy their soil. It's a really important resource in terms of their ability to grow and produce what they want to produce. So it kind of, I think the biggest challenge is getting in front of people. And once we're in front of people, kind of they kind of understand and get what we're doing quite easily, and they kind of are quite happy to come along. There are obviously a few sort of slightly more reticent to take part, as is always the case, but they tend to be the outliers rather than the norm, which is quite is good. And we found that this mapping work that we've been doing, so kind of going around drainage board by drainage board and sort of working that way, has been really useful, because we can usually highlight a couple of quite supportive farmers within that district who can help pull the rest of their peers along. So it's been a really effective way of working, because it kind of means that we get in hold of this whole group of people and might only need to have a couple of sort of current members within in those areas. So it's been positive from that point of view. And I think sort of that those sort of farming champions in districts have been really important for us.
So I'm going to jump in with a question, and after me, we'll go to Councillor Goodall and Councillor Tierney. One of the added complications of agriculture is that you have both the landowner and the tenant farmer. What's your approach when you have buy-in from one but not the other?
That is actually something that's been particularly challenging. And has been quite difficult with the County Farms estate. So County Farms has got really great buy-in to Fenland Soil, and they've been working with us since kind of inception. But some of their tenants are also quite, they're a bit skeptical, I think, of why we want to work with them, and I think they kind of think that there's some overall conspiracy. So it's difficult in that situation, and it's a case of taking a lot of time really to build up trust with the tenant, to encourage them to take part. We don't often see it the other way around, to be honest. Quite often, if a tenant is kind of engaged, they make a fairly good case for the landowner, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of sort of resistance from a landowner point of view. It tends to be vice versa. It tends to be we've got a really good landowner engagement, but if the tenant isn't, that's where it becomes a little bit stickier and a little bit more difficult to move forward. But the only way I think around that is, unless landlords kind of want to really kind of come down and be quite hard on their tenants, it's just about relationship building, and with time actually things do seem to settle.
Goodall?
Thank you, Chair. Technical question, really. Technical question, really. When these fields and farms have been farmed for hundreds of years, and we calculated and we agreed that peat is a great carbon capture. But once these fields have been ploughed and we've calculated how much carbon's been released, is it the same amount every year, or is it a diminishing scale?
That's a really good question. So whilst the peat is still fairly deep, it's fairly consistent. So you kind of see whilst it's still fairly high organic matter and kind of just sort of kind of ploughing through a fairly deep layer that is relatively of the same carbon content, those emissions stay fairly stable and they'll be consistently high. We do see a bit of a trail off as we kind of see more mineral soil inclusion, so as the subsoil underneath is being sort of mixed in with the peat layer, and that's something that we're actively trying to understand a lot more, and that Fenland Soil data is directly fed into understanding a lot better. And the sort of national emissions factor curve for peat now has changed, so it's turned into sort of more of an S shape rather than a straight curve. So we have got a little bit more understanding of how that works. It doesn't actually trail off as quickly as you'd expect. Emissions are still quite high, even with relatively low organic matter content. We have really identified that emissions from those organic mineral soils are a lot lower, and they're not at the 30 tonnes a hectare that kind of has been previously quoted. But they are still definitely high enough that we need to worry about them. And this is why some of this research on skirt soils and organic mineral soils is becoming really important, and why it's where we as an organisation are kind of focusing as one of our big goals for the next few years.
Tierney?
Thank you. Yeah. You identified a problem, and then you said one of the only solutions you know of is re-wetting. We glossed over that a bit too quick, given how controversial that phrase is.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could expand on what you mean by it, where you anticipate it needs re-wetting, who owns that land, please.
So from our point of view, obviously, we haven't got a particular target or a particular goal for re-wetting. Our goal is to make sure that the land in the Fenland area that's under agricultural usage on peat is being used in the way that is best possible. That re-wetting if it is this kind of conversation around non-re-wetting options, because actually in terms of re-wetting wide areas of farmland across the fens, it's just going to be incredibly difficult, if not impossible. We've massively changed the way that this landscape works in terms of its hydrology over the last 400 years of deep drainage. Areas that kind of used to function hydrologically really well for peatland formation don't anymore. And so we need to kind of have some conversations about what is actually possible in terms of peatland restoration. And I don't think actually in the fenlands restoration is quite the right idea in terms of what we're going for. It's about preserving the carbon that's within those soils and preventing emissions and avoiding emissions as much as we possibly can, rather than actively sort of shifting back to peat forming vegetation, because I don't think in a lot of areas across the fens and in the majority of the fens it's not going to be possible. But we do need to consider what we can do better in terms of managing those soils. So it will be isolated pockets of restoration where it makes commercial sense from a farmer to do so, because they've got investment from a BNG point of view, from a carbon storage point of view. But it won't be kind of turning massive areas of the fens into fen again, or into sort of lowland raised bog, because it's just not possible in terms of being able to do that and manage assets, protect populations from flooding and those kind of issues as well. And in terms of water availability, that's also a massive challenge going forward.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. Thanks for the answer. I think it would be a good idea if, when you're doing presentation in future, it's not a criticism, just a suggestion, that you make very clear that you're not looking at large scale rewetting, because people in Finland that I know, and certainly the district council, are very leery of that.
Yeah.
And there have been people who've suggested in the past large scale rewetting, which we're very opposed to for obvious reasons.
Yeah, of course.
So when you said the only solution we know is rewetting, that rings alarm bells. So I would recommend that you make a strong effort to not say that there's going to be large scale rewetting, because you'll just hit such a lot of opposition.
Yeah, apologies. I've assumed probably a little bit too much base knowledge for this presentation. But so our actual sort of remit in terms of fenland soil is looking at developing a mosaic of different opportunities, which will include rewetting as a solution, but on the whole is about more sustainable management of farmland.
Thank you very much, Megan. I continue to be incredibly impressed by the work that Fenland Soil is doing. It's an amazing organisation in terms of its ambition and the way in which it's able to bring in not only national but international experts. Certainly the last conference was amazing, and I've put the next one very firmly in the diary. To me, the most important thing is about your organisation is that it is really working at a grassroots level with individual farmers who know their land and know their area. And that's really important. How do you feel that the cohort of farmers generally across Cambridgeshire feel about this? You're talking about working with a certain number of farms at the moment. Are they the sort of really enthusiastic early adopters, and you've got a long tail of people who are either much less engaged or actively hostile? Or are you finding that there's growing interest, more buy-in, more enthusiasm as time goes by? Is what you're doing having an effect in changing minds and attitudes among our local farmers?
Yeah, definitely. So some of our most active members now were some of the biggest skeptics when we first approached them. So we've kind of found that particularly this mapping work we've been doing has helped a lot in terms of changing the minds of farmers that were probably previously a little bit skeptic and a little bit against the work that was going on. I think now that they've realised that we are grassroots and we are working with them and we're looking to design solutions with them rather than implement something and kind of tell them what to do, they're a lot sort of clearer on what we're up to, what we're trying to achieve, and they're a lot more engaged with it. That being said, we've obviously got quite a lot of farms still left to engage with. 45 definitely isn't sort of all of the farms across the fens, but we're seeing progress and we're seeing that number increase, which is really positive. This autumn has been quite difficult, particularly with all the sort of recent announcements. So that has made some engagement a lot more challenging, particularly as we've got some farms that are unfortunately taking they feel quite unhelpful, but sort of you can understand why attitude that actually they don't want to be involved in this kind of stuff at the moment because they've got sort of too much going on in terms of all their other problems on farm. So there has been some kind of pushback from the autumn announcements. But on the whole, I would say engagement is growing and it's largely positive. We don't see a kind of a huge amount of pushback. It's been more isolated cases of sort of larger landowners generally that have pushed back. And I think a lot of that is actually a timing thing rather than a lack of interest. It's just that we've had a difficult couple of years in the farming industry, and people are sort of more time poor than they perhaps were a couple of years ago. So it's just working with the farms and working out what we can do to engage them directly on farm, rather than kind of pulling them away for too much time.
Just have one more question. Imagining the horrible situation in which Fenland soil wasn't here, what effect would that have on this whole area of work? What would we miss if you weren't around?
Well, if we hadn't existed for the last couple of years, there's £1.1 million worth of investment into studying this work in the Fens that wouldn't have been received, and would have been spent elsewhere in the country. So that's obviously one big thing that we've helped leverage and keep within the Fens and keep within this area rather than elsewhere. I think engagement with farmers would be a lot slower, because it would be reliant on what can be achieved in terms of work by our fantastic colleagues in the ENGO sector, who deliver great work but probably aren't quite as well trusted by the farming community. So they definitely, from conversations with them, face a lot more pushback in terms of their engagement and outreach. So I think from that point of view, having a trusted organisation that is grassroots, is very bottom up, and is really farmer sort of led and farmer focused, is really helping in terms of persuading people to concentrate on this and actually put their time and their effort into it. And I think the fact that we've probably had the most difficult decade in farming in a really long time, and people are still putting their time and money as farms into this project, shows how much trust and how much respect there is for it, and how much engagement we're actually receiving.
Thank you very much, Megan. That a very fascinating topic, but I'm afraid we're going to have to move on to our next item. Thank you for joining us today. So item number 8 on our agenda is the director's highlight report. So Judith Barker, our executive director for Place and Connectivity, is going to introduce her report.
Thank you, Chair. I will be brief, and I would just like to agree with you, Chair, that both the presentations I think we've had this morning have been really fascinating, and I will be very keen to get the feedback of the committee on the value of those and how we've been able to organise that in terms of planning a forward programme for 2025. So yes, I'll pick out 2 or 3 things from the director's report, and then obviously, as ever, keen to take your questions. Obviously, we commenced the report with an update in terms of some of the many things that are happening at national government level, and indeed the Mayor attended a roundtable, I think it was last week, with the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero, in order to think how we work together with that government department, and at officer level I continue to be involved in those discussions. And we spoke at the last meeting about the opportunity that Great British Energy is providing, and are looking with interest at some of the concepts that are coming through there, and I believe that we will have more details on some of the things that are actually happening to deliver some of the things within that legislation from our colleagues at DESNZ. So one of the things that we are keen, obviously, that we are working on then are sort of set out in the regional updates. We've got the Fenland Climate Change Risk Assessment that was published, which is a very considerable document with a lot of detail that was done by the Tyndall Centre at the University of East Anglia, working with the Future Fens integrated approach. And I think that was a really important piece a piece of work, and it links with work that we'll be doing in the new year in terms of a wider assessment of risk, which will then flow into the climate action planning work. Obviously, we've brought at our last meeting the infrastructure delivery framework that you had commissioned through this committee to look at those 4 themes around transport, water, energy and climate and the environment. That is now, as I said in October, is very much aligned to what is going into the local growth plan. And in terms of the local growth plan, we are, so as an officer, I'm now leading the work in terms of looking at those infrastructure constraints and kind of building on the work that infrastructure delivery framework did. And actually thinking about, okay, so if those are the constraints, what are the projects that we need to deliver? Now, the work that we've done with our local authority partners means that we've built up a list of about, off the top of my head, it's about 60 different projects that potentially deliver across those 4 themes. And obviously what we now need to do is to kind of refine that list, think about what fits, and think about actually what you need to do to take those actions, because not all of those will necessarily, well, many will, I'm sure, require funding, but some of them are actually things that we need to consider about, you know, do we need to ask government for regulatory change? Is there different powers we need? Those things to go forward, as well as of that work. And one of the things that we are talking very closely with our colleagues in economy and growth is that not only are we going to be leading on the work around infrastructure development, but we're also leading on the work around sustainability, and really talking with the representing the issue of sustainability within that emerging local growth plan, so that we ensure that the issues of, for instance, the environment, climate mitigation and adaptation are thought at from the beginning in terms of the development of that document. And I think one of the things we were going to suggest is that it might be helpful going into early 2025 that this committee might be interested in an update on that plan, so that you can see what's in the emerging plan and maybe give us a steer as a committee on how we should take that sustainability agenda further forward in that. Last point I just wanted to make, obviously, ANZA has provided an update on the affordable housing programme and the various units that are moving forward. So rather than doing a separate paper, we've included that in there at the moment. Obviously, very aware that there's a lot of talk in terms of the future role of combined authorities in the world of housing, but we don't have any definitive announcements on that yet. But obviously, as and when there are updates on that space, then obviously we will continue to bring those updates through this committee. And as the Mayor said earlier, the next committee is scheduled for the 29th of January. So at that point, very happy to take members' questions, Chair.
Any members have questions? Councillor Day?
I just wanted to echo what Judith said about the importance of the local growth plan, and it's obviously going to be a critical document going forward because it clearly overlaps with our work here on the committee, and I certainly would be supportive of this, or ask for this to be included as an agenda item at the next committee with the project plan, timetable and overview to enable the committee to support the document's development. So just wanted to ask if that was possible. I know, Judith, you already mentioned it, so I thought I'd do that now. Thanks.
Certainly, I'll work with colleagues to bring that to the January meeting.
Thank you, Chair. In transport and connectivity, is there any update on Ely North Junction, the A10, A47, and so on and so forth?
Councillor Gooderall, have you been invited to the Transport and Connectivity Committee? Okay, well, those are all topics that are frequently on the agenda of the Transport Committee. I don't know if there are any issues that you would want to bring across, Judith.
I've not really mastered this microphone, have I? I'll very briefly update you and certainly refer you to the papers of the Transport and Infrastructure Committee as well. In terms of Ely Junction, that in fact, all three clearly of those schemes fit within this desire to ensure that connectivity is more effective in the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough area. So they are all form part of that wider consideration in the local growth plan, but also the existing work that we're doing on the local transport and connectivity plan. In terms of Ely Junction, we are continuing to talk with our DfT colleagues to see, we know that the business case is very robust, and we're pushing with England's economic heartland, Transport East, in order to get clarity about when that funding might come forward, because we know the business case is strong. We will continue to do that, and I know indeed the Mayor mentions that at every transport meeting that he attends. The A10 project, I won't go into details, but is currently having a gateway review, which will be reported to I think it's on the forward look for the next Transport Committee in the middle of January. And in terms of the A47, we remain a member of the A47 Alliance and continuing to work with colleagues in that area. And I'm very mindful of the fact that that is a priority for authority colleagues in certainly in the eastern part of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough.
Dupre?
Thank you. Looking at 3.1 on the update, the FENS climate change risk assessment, which is a really important document with some very interesting conclusions, and I was wondering how far that was already affecting our view on our ways forward with some of the work we're doing, and what we are going to be doing to respond to it and allow its conclusions to feed into our own work plans and, at a more basic level, our assumptions.
Thank you. That's a really important question, and something that we should absolutely draw out at this meeting. So firstly, that work was, as I'm sure colleagues are aware, was commissioned by the Future FENS integrated approach, of which we are members, and indeed the Mayor regularly attends those sessions. And one of the we are currently working with that partnership to identify how best we can add value in that space. I'm sure it is a blend of the convening and facilitating roles, and clearly as the Mayor being a member of that, I think that the prominence and the convening role that a Mayor can play in that space is particularly important to get people galvanising around, as you say, the pretty significant messages there are in that report. So that's something that we're talking with Anglian Water, Environment Agency and the other members of the FFIA. More specifically, I think the significance of that report is absolutely informing the wider work, which Adrian will go on to talk about in terms of the Climate Change Action Plan and the risk assessment. But it also, I think, really drives the need to ensure that the sustainability aspect of the local growth plan is really embedded into how we do that, because I think it very clearly sets out the importance. So absolutely, it's what's driving my activity within that local growth plan, and will continue to do so. And Adrian will specifically refer in his remarks about the Climate Change Action Plan later, which picks that up as well. I'm sure there's more we can do, but it is a very important report. Can you remind me, Adrian, did we publish that report on our website? I know we spoke about it, but it might be something that we could look at wider communications.
We maybe take away an action that it's published on our website, but also make sure it's delivered to each of our planning authorities. And I think that's where the action probably needs to be taken.
Yeah.
And I know Councillor Dupre brought up that specific document, and you mentioned how it links into the local growth plan. I also think the LNRS nature recovery work needs to be reflected in the growth plan. The Water Resources East things we just talked about need to be included. The findings of the Climate Commission commissioned by our organization, those all need to be referenced in terms of the constraints and the challenges in growth.
Thank you, Chair. I can confirm that we absolutely will do that, and that will be reflected in the report back to this committee in January.
More two comments, and one is to say, acknowledge and hopefully minute my thanks that the officers have circulated a note to us all beforehand regarding the concerns I raised with regard to the possibility of work that has previously been delivered as part of the affordable houses programme, that we could somehow have ongoing liability where there has been poor delivery by partners who are no longer active. So thank you for doing that, and I think that was an important reassurance to myself. But it was also to, I think, following on from this managing the programme and your comment, Judith, about the housing programme. I am grateful, and I think again it needs to be minuted with regard to the housing programme, that the overview and scrutiny programme committee are now undertaking action looking at the historical problems of the delivery of this programme, particularly with certain areas around the 100k programme and some of the governance decisions, and indeed the concerns I raised within 5-6 weeks of becoming a mayor. It's taken a very long time, and I previously was met with an awful lot of pushback from officers who are no longer at this organisation, but I'm very grateful that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee has brought together a group which is going to be looking at that, because I think, as hopefully we do as an organisation, have a role working with all our partners around delivering social housing, affordable housing in line with government policy, where I hope we will all be able to work together. We must not make the same mistakes that we did before. So thank you, if that could be minuted.
At our last meeting, members also requested that a future agenda, we receive information on the winding up of the housing program, as in, what are the steps we're taking? What is the timeline for closing that that part of the combined authorities role? And it will take care and consideration on how that happens. So, Day?
This is not necessarily a question, but it's more an update from Peterborough around the affordable housing programme at 3.3 on this report. So in addition to the units listed in the report, Halo were delivering with funding leftovers. There is some further funds available from the balance of the unused grant originally allocated to Cross Keys Homes to deliver some modular units at garage sites in Peterborough. These dwellings have not come forward, and the planning consent has now lapsed. The £332,000 funding still linked to the garage site development is now available. Apparently, Cross Keys Homes did not have a scheme ready to transfer the funding to, but it needs to be allocated by early in the new year. Halo are currently looking for market units to acquire in Peterborough to apply for this grant, so that it does not get returned to MHCLG. The maximum grant per unit that CPCA can provide with this money is £45,000 per dwelling. Halo can usually make shared ownership tenure work at this grant rate. So I just wanted to update you on that. Okay. I can send that to you in writing if that's helpful, Judith.
Yes, thank you. And Asma updated me about that issue last week, and we agreed it was probably too late for this committee, but I think it's really helpful to have that update. But she will formally be updating this committee. She's asked for it to go on the forward look, and will be will update on the 29th of January.
I don't see any other questions on this one. No voting is required on this item. It's simply to note. So I'll move on to agenda item 9, which is the local nature recovery strategy. And I think Adrian is going to give us an update.
I've got the lucky one there rather than the one next to me. So yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to bring everyone up to date on where we are with the local nature recovery strategy and set out a revised timetable. So I know you debated this at your last meeting in terms of progress. So just to sort of summarise, this is a new statutory activity that we're doing. We are reliant on following the regulations as set out in the Act, but also emerging guidance from DEFRA, which has come along with the process. So it wasn't all there at the beginning. So I think there is an element of challenge in developing this new strategy with responding to that new guidance as we've gone along. The position we were in when we reported to you last time was that we suspected that we would need to do additional technical work to have a robust strategy to bring forward as a draft plan. That has proved to be the case, and looking at the timetable, it doesn't fit with bringing that to you in your February meeting. Therefore, we've proposed a revised meeting and then through how that follows through. The challenge with that is that there is the period where the committee doesn't meet. In the document itself, we're proposing that we'll bring back the draft strategy for you to approve at your June meeting, and then we followed the stages of there is a statutory consultation needs to take place with supporting authorities, which is all of our district councils and the City and County Council, plus Natural England. Then that follows by a period of public consultation, which we're proposing would be an 8-week period, followed by then obviously responding to that consultation. In terms of where we are compared to others, just to sort of put that into context, there's been one local nature recovery strategy approved to date in the Southwest, but the majority of the other 48 are predicting end of year, as in end of next year, approvals around November. So we're not an outlier in the sense of where we are in the process. We obviously had anticipated and hoped we'd be further along, but there is significant work that we've been doing. In terms of that technical work, we had a mapping workshop last week with the consultants working on the mapping and the ecologist and some members of the steering group. And I can assure the committee that significant work, technical work, has been undertaken and continues to be undertaken. The challenge in the local nature recovery strategy is the mapping of existing sites is relatively straightforward. Then setting priorities around species and then the methodology for working out new areas of importance it is the challenging bit of this exercise. And whilst we have some broad guidance from DEFRA and Natural England, there's not a prescribed way of doing that. So there's some really interesting work that's been done by our ecologist group in firming up that methodology. Just for clarity, in the paper you've got in front of you, the timetable is set out in 3.7. I did include an alternative to just illustrate what would happen if we looked at a longer consultation in summer, and the knock-on effect of that, because of the way all of our committees meet and the board, it would be a significant delay again on the local nature recovery strategy. So that's just for illustration. The proposed timetable is set out in 3.7. I'm happy to take any questions.
This is very interesting. I was able to speak to a lot of my colleagues across the country who've been working on similar schemes. As Adrian mentioned, only one has successfully adopted theirs so far. That's the West of England Combined Authority, so the Bristol area and the countryside around it. I think many of them are coming to the same challenges that we have, sort of a mix of how much detail is required, but also how little government guidance there is because it's such a new idea. So I'm disappointed to see that it's taking longer than we thought. But at the same time, we're creating a document which will be a material planning consideration. I think it's very important that we get the detail right. Otherwise, it would affect planning across our region for quite a while. Are there questions for Adrian on this document?
Thank you, Chair. I too agree with you that the delay is disappointing, but however, as long as we get it right in the end, then so be it. Reading down in the chart underneath, the colourful chart underneath, is it correct that the board has delegated all the powers to this committee? And if so, is that correct constitutionally?
I'm going to refer to Rena on that one because this is something else we want to discuss in terms of the voting on this item too. Do you have advice? Rena? Go ahead, Adrian.
So in terms of the current position is that the board did delegate the decision to agree the draft strategy to go out to consultation. So there is a board decision on that. So under the constitution, new strategies are approved by the board, but obviously they have the ability to delegate it down, and they did do that for the consultation draft. In the timetable, we have assumed that we would go back to board to request the final approval also be delegated, but we don't need to do that at this point.
So just to follow that up, so at the July meeting of the board, they agreed to delegate authority to our committee to approve a draft strategy that could go out to public consultation. So that's limiting us to saying, okay, we have a draft that we think is comprehensive enough. It's ready to go out to public consultation. That is the only aspect that's been delegated to this committee. And that's sort of the timeline that Adrian is asking us about today. The draft is not ready, but we're noting the timeline, and we're being proposed with an option of what the dates and timeline are. Councillor Goodall.
Thank you for that update. But I'm looking down with second round of approval process and consultation. Again, it says it's been delegated to this committee, not just a draft.
So in terms of on the timetable, we've shown that a request will need to go to board. So for clarification, that the approval of the final strategy has not been delegated, but we would need to go to the board and request that as part of the process.
Councillor Day.
To really press the button thing. Just from Peterborough's perspective, we're supportive of the timeline and the extra time, and we're supportive of the 8-week consultation period. I don't know if we've covered that already because but yeah, just thought I'd let you know that thing.
So in the decision that's before us, it says, would the committee proceed to approve a timetable with an 8-week consultation? So yes, that's the proposal from the officers, is the 8-week. Councillor du Preez.
Thank you. Sorry to go back to the constitutional and governance question, but presumably it would be better to get the delegation agreed by the board sooner rather than later. Where is that in their forward plan? Presumably we're not going to leave it till about October, November and then panic.
In the next look at the forward plan, we will pick that up with the team. So the December version has been issued, and then Joe and I will take that as an action to plan that into the forward plan for the new year.
Any other questions? No. Okay. So we've got an A and a B in the report recommendations. So the first is to note the consultation draft will be brought to us in June. So that will be the draft version of the LNRS. And then following that, it will go out for consultation. Recommendation B is that the committee proceed to oversee and approve the timetable with an 8-week consultation length. It's a simple majority of voting. Can I just check? Councillor Day was not here for all of the item. Is she eligible to vote? So, let's take a vote. So are we happy to proceed? And, oh yes, I'll propose, Mayor will second. So I'll ask all in favor of proceeding with the timeline outlined with an 8-week consultation period. Okay, I'm going to take that as unanimous. Okay, before we go to item 10, I'm going to take a 5-minute comfort break because I know we have a few more items. So right now it's 11:45. I will return at 11. will present us with an update.
Thank you, Chair. So, an update here on progress on a number of items to take you through. So, the first around the Climate Action Plan review, and Judith already mentioned this morning the activity that the Combined Authority has been asked to do on the local growth plan, and the need to align any consideration of future growth with what are the impacts on our resources, including the climate impacts. As part of that work, there is a work stream that is focusing on infrastructure, picking up transport, water, energy, and climate, and therefore it will be the case that the climate implications will be drawn out of any discussion around that local growth plan. There's a sort of critical dependency between what we do in the refresh of our climate plan and what we're thinking about future growth, because obviously I think we've mentioned risks before. So in terms of looking at the climate risk, we'll need to input in different levels of growth according to whatever the ambition is coming out around that to see those impacts. We are looking to align those processes. So in terms of where we are with the review, Climate Action Plan review, we've got resources there ready to deploy an evidence base, but we're talking to the colleagues working on a growth plan to make sure that we're not separately commissioning something. And so we're going to bring that back to the next committee meeting, where there's a clear presentation on local growth plan as well as the thinking on the review evidence. We've also already got scheduled in the work that's been done, funded by Innovate UK and led by the University of Cambridge, around the locally determined contributions in terms of emissions from this area, and how we would negotiate around activity to deliver significant reductions in those emissions. And we've touched on some of the challenges already this morning around water and also soils. That's also scheduled for the January meeting. So really, we'll be bringing a sort of consolidated picture to you at that meeting. But just to reassure the committee that we are fully engaging with the local growth plan conversation on those grounds. Do you want me to go through all three things and then come back for questions?
Are there any questions at this stage?
Okay, so moving on to sort of delivery. So as we highlighted at the last meeting, this is a development year around green projects through the MTFP allocation that was presented. We have continued to move things forward. So in 4.1, highlighting a couple of big projects there that we've approved and will be going into delivery. Particularly, you want to highlight the domestic energy and efficiency project, because that was us as an authority meeting a gap between the end of a grant scheme and waiting for the new government to decide what the new grant scheme was, and the potential to lose lots of suppliers and all of the built up capacity. And so we're providing that gap, and that would lead into the new scheme that has now been announced. And also, it's a bit of a theme today, and Megan's still here, but we've got the peat affected roads trial, which is another impact of issues around the nature of the soils across our area, which is a testing process around trialing some different management and renewal techniques on a bit of our road, to see if there are better ways to respond to the fact of the subsidence that you get on roads affected by peat. And that's going to investment committee on the 16th of December. It's gone through our internal investment panel. Table 1 sets out progress across the whole programme, and significant activity has been taking place in terms of getting schemes running and into delivery. and happy to pick up any questions on those, with a number of grant funding agreements working their way through the system at the moment. I'll just pause there, and then I've got to update about the Opportunity Fund.
So I'll add a point there. So we've got the net zero villages included in the update report. I was really happy to speak to some officers from East Cambs about how far they've already got in making sure that funding ends up with local community groups. Huntingdonshire's our scheme will open probably next week for expressions of interest. I'm wondering if at a future committee we could have an agenda item which would summarize where all of the different authorities are in terms of delivering that funding, because I know it's a very tight timescale. So if that could all be brought together in one update for us, I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah, happy to do that. As you said, the number of grant funding agreements we're in the process of getting them back, being signed, sealed, and so a number of other authorities are thinking about launching imminently too. So we're happy to bring that back.
Councillor Goodall.
Yes, this needs updating in the remarks column here for the local nature recovery strategy. It says in delivery with planned completion in 2025. We're just in the other side where it's 26 now. When on the previous.
So
Next, this would reflect the decision we've made in the report.
just to clarify, I mean, it's the planned completion of 2025. Under that timetable, we do get completion of local nature recovery strategy by the end of next year. So it's still it is accurate. I think that maybe the in delivery refers to the process of developing it is in delivery, not the actual strategy is in delivery. Yeah.
The mayor has a question.
Yeah, it's obviously in the table, which is very pleasant on the eye in terms of showing how over the course of the last 18 months, 2 years, you have moved towards beginning to get capital grants out and everything. Was particularly taken by, however, that's not what I'm really focusing on. If that's what it takes to do it, grand. My question was about the issue of waste per se, and having gone along to a conference where I'd spoken to quite a lot of people about the thing about making waste management. There's no comment in here, and I don't know if it's because we haven't got a specific pot of cash that we're putting towards it, but as I understood it, with regard to the waste side of this narrative, we're meant to be coming together with our partners at district council level, county council level, to produce a waste management strategy. And I don't know where that is. Now, is it not there because we haven't put any money into it and you're just getting on with that in the background, and that's great? But my sense when I came away from it was something that needed, and this is the greatest respect to very much aware there's lots going on, as then that needs more of a focus, the waste management strategy for the whole of the Cambridge and Peterborough area. And I did,
yeah, I'll in terms of the climate action plan, we identified waste as an issue as one of our themes. But in setting out the actions at that time, it was very dependent on the previous government issuing its national strategy and approach, and so we didn't have any specific funding allocated to delivery against that because it was essentially awaiting the strategy to be reviewed. We're not actively engaged on that at the moment, so that it will be an issue we would have to take away and discuss with the waste management authorities, which obviously would be Peterborough and Cambridge County Council as the upper tier authorities, and then obviously districts are the collection authorities.
So my question would be, and again, this is what a committee is for, is that the absence of that in terms of movement forward, is it something that we actually as a committee could get behind or make a we brought different people to come and speak about it, but the waste management strategy and where it sits within our expectation as a board, so not as a board, as a committee, could be brought up the pecking order. It's my personal opinion, but we need to have, and if that means more capacity, we need to, rather than just waiting on something that may come down as a government edict, something that we need to be kind of highlighting as a bigger priority.
I feel there are complications in this topic because of RECAP. So there is already in existence a cooperative between all of the authorities in terms of waste and trying to work together more on waste. I think that needs to be considered more before we just steam ahead. RECAP would include the county and then the different districts and their waste procedures. I agree. We need to think about it more and decide, like with some of the other funds we've been talking about over the last few months, the capital sitting there is not benefiting local people. How can we activate it and get it moving in the right way that we need it to create action? Should the committee request an update on that, maybe on its own, separately from the reports we usually get at a future meeting? Judith?
Absolutely. We'll take it away to consider where it can fit on the forward plan, and perhaps who we can bring in order to speak about that topic, which would be useful. And I can also confirm that on the particular project that you mentioned, the Waterbeach Renewable Energy Network, there is in fact a change request to confirm the new timing of that project and why there has been delays, either going to the investment panel or the investment committee, but apologies, I can't remember which one. So that is coming forward shortly to confirm the details of that project.
Councillor Day?
Oh, hello. My question's around waste and our household recycling centre in Peterborough. We've had a real problem with people coming from other authority areas using our household waste recycling facility because it's open more than anyone else's. Some are just open 2 days. So we've had to limit the number of items our residents can bring. I mean, it's been good because we've had to be able to say, well, you can't just bring DIY project, your home DIY projects. That's not what the household waste recycling facility is for. But now our residents are limited and they will have to get permits to prove that they live in our area before they can use our facility. So for example, I think I only know this because this came through my climate environment committee, but some local neighbouring authorities only have a waste facility, a recycling centre open 2 days a week. So just to make the committee aware that we're getting quite overburdened in Peterborough, and when we've put those things in place, but maybe residents will be going to that thinking they can use that facility, where actually they won't be able to. I don't know how we get that messaging out. We've certainly put that messaging out via social media to our local residents. So that was just something to point out. And then my second question was on the schools retrofit low carbon heating programme. I wondered, it doesn't specify on this table. I think I've seen it somewhere before where those 3 locally maintained schools are, but there's a really great project in America whereby all of the local schools, I mean, I know we have an academy system which doesn't help us, are actually putting solar panels on their roof, and they're not having to pay for any of their energy. And I just wondered, will this project be rolled out further across the constituency authorities if it's successful in this MTFS budget? So a point really, and then a question.
So on the second point, the retrofit for schools is a county council project, and so on our list shows some of the supporting funding that we provided to that project. So the combined authority itself is not running the retrofit of schools project. And then on the first point, I think this waste issue is something we'll see more and more of, especially in communities that live near borders with other waste authorities. So, for example, if Bedfordshire were to decide, Central Beds decide that they require a fee to leave things at their household recycling centres, that will increase people to drive over the border and use ours. So these are the type of topics that the RECAP group usually touch upon. So I think as long as we link that into our future work on that area.
So 2 points. I think it feels like in terms of the waste conversation, it might be helpful to get somebody from RECAP to speak to this committee and pick up some of these issues that are already live. And I live in Central Beds, and I recognise some of the challenges you're talking about. So we can talk about those at length another time. In terms of the schools retrofit, there were 13 projects originally, 13 schools involved, of which and there was a particular government grant that was drawn down, which because of and then because of other issues, including inflation, it was then not possible to deliver all of those. But we've now, by funding effectively 3 of the schools, we've allowed the programme to go ahead. Maxine will be speaking to us shortly about the work of the Greater South East Net Zero Hub, and particularly some of the work they do with the public sector. So that might be interesting to pick up after Maxine speaks to us later.
Councillor du Preez.
Thank you. Yes, just firstly to say that at the County Council we have been facing these cross-boundary waste and household recycling centre issues for some time, with the borders with Hertfordshire and Norfolk and, you know, Essex and all of these places. There is a lot of movement. People will naturally go to their nearest recycling centre, actually, even if there aren't the incentives such as longer opening hours or being more relaxed about what they accept or whatever. It is just your nearest recycling centre. People don't draw mental lines of local authority boundaries or even county boundaries, and it is very difficult because there is an extent to which enforcing things like, you know, you have to be able to show your residency status and get permits and all the rest of it, turns into this kind of mutually assured destruction that isn't really good for anybody. But it is understandable in the current economic climate, but it is an issue, and I'm sure will be an ongoing one. It would be interesting to hear some more about that. My question was about the peat affected roads trial, previously known as the Fen Roads trial, which in the text of the report at 4.1, I think, sorry, scrolling it down, says that it was considered by the investment panel on 14th November and will be presented to agreement to investment committee on 16th December. Looking down to the table, for Transport Fen Roads trial, then says it will be considered an investment committee on 16th December 2025. Does that really, that is just an error. It's quite difficult with this report because in the table, some of the actions have dates, some don't, and you think, well, maybe they ought to. There is quite a mix of dates going from things happening this year to 2025 into 2026, even 2027, or I think the latest one is 2029 with the Water Resources East membership. But one never quite gets a grip on whether that really is the year in question or whatever. The danger is that as members we always say, well, I would really like to see included in this particular additional item, and you see these tables kind of explode and explode and explode. I'm not asking for that on this report. You will be pleased to hear. I just wondered whether there was somewhere maybe some kind of SharePoint document that we could see live that had the more information that some of us might want to see.
If through you, Chair. Yes, I mean it's a tricky one, isn't it? Sort of drowning everyone in lots of data, or not. But that absolutely is what we do have, and indeed, Adrian is looking at that master spreadsheet as we speak. So I think absolutely we can continue to work. I mean, what I was just thinking is actually it would be really helpful, given some of the conversations around this table, for us to be able to present what's happening this year, what's happening next year, and it's probably about different cuts to the same information to make it more useful. What we try to do this time is be comprehensive and give you a real, hopefully, to get the breadth and the depth of different activities. But absolutely, we can give you a cut another time, and I can absolutely assure you, if you want to come and look, the detailed spreadsheet is here. So we have got that information. Can provide it perhaps in a different format next time. But I think as well, there's a note to me in terms of the final sign off the papers of just cross-checking the different dates as well, which I will try my best to pick up in future.
One of the things, if I could just add, that would be really quite useful to know in this is that there are lots of other bodies engaged in this, sometimes even other bodies in the driving seat. And it would be useful to be able to see on that master spreadsheet who those bodies are and whether they are us, in fact, I mean, us as individual constituent authorities, for example, and who's actually doing what and who do we need to talk to about who's leading all of this, because it is different bodies in different cases.
Councillor Tierney?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I know this isn't the authority that looks after waste, but because the issue was raised and there are people who've got some say in these matters around the table, I just wanted to endorse what Councillor Dupre said about this deadly cycle we're getting ourselves in. And I think we ought to think about it, because the more obstacles and difficulties and bureaucracy we throw in the way of people getting rid of their waste, they're not going to stop using the waste. They're not going to start paying for the waste. Some will, but most won't start paying for it. In fact, what they'll do is either burn it, which I'm fairly sure isn't something we want to encourage, or they'll fly tip it, which costs the local authority to pick up the waste, and then they still have to get rid of it. So I do feel like we're getting ourselves into an endless trap, and people need to be relaxing and thinking about making it more easy for people to get rid of their waste rather than harder. Thank you.
Any other questions before we move on to the Opportunity Fund? Oh, Councillor Todd Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I just saw the general point, really, looking through Table 1 and that heading as well, enabling resilient communities, is very much, I guess, what this committee and the CPCA is about, really. It is about enabling, so providing capital investment, other funding, our partners, our partner authorities, providing guidance, providing projects and plans. And I think what we're all interested in, to some extent, like recognising that strategic role and our enabling sort of role as well, is maybe at some point getting a list of some of the delivery of some of these projects perhaps through this committee from some of those authorities and organisations that we've enabled with funding and so forth. And I think at some point it would be very useful, perhaps, I don't know, maybe a snapshot of some of the projects that have been delivered as a result of the enabling role of the CPCA and this committee. And I think it would just be interesting to have some kind of perhaps timescale on when we might be able to get that kind of report back, which I think it'd be helpful just to put some like concrete delivery on all this fantastic work we're doing to enable so much to come forward.
Yes, thank you. I think that's a really important point, and it's one that's absolutely brought out as well in discussions at, for instance, Overview and Scrutiny, who are very clear, of course, that they want to see performance information, and indeed do receive considerable performance information. So I think one of the things we've focused on this year is really gearing up to have a better programme of delivery than has perhaps been in place. So I think perhaps what we're seeing is we're kind of growing that piece, and I think we, with the support of the committee, we've moved quite a long way in a short time in terms of moving from having a lot of plans to actually doing quite a lot of doing. So I think that's really positive, but absolutely we need to focus on making sure then that we can track the performance. We obviously do have a performance and finance report, and that's coming later on this agenda, and over time I think we need to now sort of make sure that that's not just about financial delivery, but that also reflects the delivery of what the outcomes and the outputs that we are delivering through the investment of money. I think the other thing that's really important is actually bringing the projects here, and I think it's been great to see Megan here this morning, who's been the recipient of CPCA money, and I think perhaps that is sort of a blend of the reporting and actually hearing the voices of the people who've used the money, as indeed we did before with Huntingdonshire Biodiversity as another example. I think that probably that breadth of things, but having that focus is really important.
Mayor?
She follows on from the last point, acknowledgement of what you just said, Judith. In the actual table, there is a reference to the Net Zero Villages project, and you're going to have, my first question is, which is the authority that is currently delivering a net zero village? Okay, and the four in the final process of signing a grant funding arrangement and planning funding. The reason I say that is I'm not really up to date with it, and my big frustration with although it's good that we're working together, money moves between our constituent members. I have lost count of the number of cases where something to do with businesses, where we funded businesses across the whole of the region, or indeed more recently the Rural Prosperity Fund, where we have, I know work's been done in East Cambridgeshire, Fenland's just closing, but it was work which was delivered in South Cambs, which actually, in all honesty, the fact that it was the combined authority working with the constituent authority was never recognised. And I mean, perhaps I would say that, wouldn't I? But I am the mayor, and I am the mayor for the combined authority. And it's a frustration of mine is that when money is divvied out to constituent members, I mean, I'm just going to invite Aubrey on myself at the moment, is that there isn't always the clear recognition that these are partnership arrangements and they are delivering because we've worked together. So my question is that I didn't know about the East Cambridgeshire one particularly. I would love to go along with representatives of East Cambridgeshire to go and visit and see wherever state it currently is. And then with regard to the grant funding arrangement, as I have done recently with the business team and our comms team, working closely with development officers in local areas and the comms team in different areas, can we please make it a condition that it's very clear? And then if it means putting a plaque up as well, can we get this sort of sorted out? So that was a lot of asks, but it's born of absolute frustration.
So I'm going to jump in, take chair's prerogative and push back on that, because this is a two-way street in funding. Okay. So if I take the biodiversity project in Huntingdonshire, for example, we created a lot of comms around it, and we shared a lot of comms with the combined authority that we hoped they would do around it. And in many ways, I feel the project didn't receive very much comms attention from the combined authority, where they could have used that as an example of here's something good that we funded. The person who received the funding was doing much more to try to publicize the good work that had happened. And so we can shout about the combined authority funded us to do this as much as we can, but if we aren't getting matching support from the comms team here, it's not going to work.
No, I mean, and I would come back, sorry, if you allow me, Chair. I mean, it would be my frustration as well as you say. So I think there is something about comms teams working together to articulate that ambition. But I am generally dead keen to know what's happening with East Cambridgeshire. Okay.
So two things on that point. So one of the things that we're now doing as the Place and Connectivity Directorate is working very closely with our colleagues in communications and having very frequent conversations about this, both across transport, climate, buses, all dimensions of what we're doing. And we're also sort of making provision in what we're doing to say, if they haven't got the capacity to do something, then, we consider, well, if we're doing a project of a certain amount, then we need to make sure that they are aware of it from the beginning so they can start talking about it. So I think we're probably in a place where that's hopefully beginning to change. But I think that is because we recognise it hasn't been as good as it needed to be previously, and that is important. Certainly, perhaps, my understanding is that certainly in previous places I've worked, there have been those comms protocols within grant funding agreements, and we can include them. But I think we also have to do that enabling of making sure our comms team is aware of it to work with the comms teams in different places. So that's very much a priority at the moment, and hopefully you will see that continuing to build.
I would also add in that, so we're on the climate program delivery agenda item. The members have requested to see the comms plan for the climate program delivery. And so I'm still hoping to see that in an agenda to come. Adrian, did you want to come in?
Yeah, so on the East Camp, so there's a Net Zero Villages grant program. They've opened it for expressions of interest. So at the moment, there isn't a defined project. So there will be, but feedback was that it was incredibly well received and already more expressions of interest than the available grant. So hopefully Mayor will be bringing you projects to go and see very shortly.
Good. Well done. Yeah, no, well done on getting ahead with it. Yeah, that's good.
Thank you. Just in terms of the comms plan on the climate programme, what we have got is a comms plan on the Opportunity Fund, which obviously Adrian is just going to go on and speak about. I'm not sure that we've got a comms plan formally in place for the wider climate programme, but absolutely we are regularly having those conversations, and that's probably something that we need to formalise going forward. But we absolutely do have one in the Opportunity Fund, and that's been reflected in, we are delivering it in order to do that launch that some of you may have seen last week.
I think that is the missing link that you've identified there that probably created some of the frustrations to both Mayor and
I'm
I.
not frustrated.
Oh,
Just,
you look frustrated. Sorry.
Just observation.
Councillor Day.
Sorry, I'm pushing the table. I just wondered, so obviously I'm aware of the Opportunity Fund because since I've been on the committee, it's been created. But with the larger sort of MTFS projects, how do constituency authorities, and Peterborough is quite a large one, apply for that? Because Peterborough, I've asked my officer to give me a report on how we're benefit or what's happening in Peterborough from that. And there isn't really very much. Maybe we've just not been aware of the process, I wondered.
So I think that that's our next item that Adrian is going to update us on.
I think there's two processes. So at the beginning of this year, we had a number of projects that had kind of been in abeyance for some time that we were keen to move forward, and that includes the net zero villages, and we've been able to move on that. Then through conversations with our local authority partners, we have been encouraging the submission of business case development, and so may have then been considered through our investment panel and investment committee process. And then there is also, and that sort of still remains open for consideration going forward. And I was speaking with colleagues in Peterborough last week about a particular opportunity that we may consider going forward that very much aligns with the themes that we've got there. And then specifically, we've got the application process for the Opportunity Fund, which is live on the website. And I should probably now hand over to my colleague to talk about that.
Okay, so the Opportunity Fund is open. It was launched, and we've had 2 online briefing sessions, which were very well attended. More than 50 external partners in attendance for the first session, and then we ran another session early evening to allow more accessible times for people who couldn't make working hours. Essentially, it's a process where we are inviting expressions of interest first, just to do basic eligibility, and surprising how many people bid for things that they're just not eligible for. So we're hoping to help save them the time and save us the time. And then we have a briefing session today for potential applicants to find a bit more about what makes a good application. So that's open. And we've been recording these as well so that people who aren't able to attend can do. We have already had 13 expressions of interest, which is great. So people are hot off in terms of getting applications in. The deadline for the completion of the full applications is the 17th of January. And that's because it's this year's capital money, and it's going into an investment panel and then investment committee for approval, so that we can get grant funding agreements sorted by the end of the financial year. So all local authorities are aware of this and have been engaged in the process, and it's available to essentially not for profit. So it's not for businesses, because we have other opportunities, or we've done other opportunities in the past for businesses, and we have support of Dayton Bell as helping us in providing some of the capacity behind the scenes, who've got lots of experience in running these types of grant programs, which we've been delivering. So the key thing is that now we are open, the details are on the website, and that includes the sample application forms and the guidance for applying, and the links to the workshops we've already held. So there's a lot of information there that people can access to put in those initial expressions. It's between £50,000 and £150,000 capital. Although if there are exceptional collaborative bids, then that can increase the total somewhat. And it's within, you'll recall, the fund of £1 million. So ultimately, we'll need to see the amount that we get in. And I think a question earlier was sort of how we're reviewing what we're doing. Obviously, we'll look at whether that's a justification for bringing back a request for more funding if there are some really strong projects that didn't make this round. But that's obviously something that the committee can consider later.
Thank you, Adrian. That sets out. We were really pleased, as you said, with the number of people who were able to attend. So we had well over 80 across both of the sessions. I just wanted to say 2 or 3 things. One was, at the last meeting, you as a committee requested that you would be able to see the proposed bid applications when they come in and being assessed before they went to investment panel. So we're working with Joe to get that in the diary. So that will be an informal session of this committee.
Tentatively the Friday, the 7th of February. So
thank you for that confirmation. So we're making sure that you have that opportunity, and we will be looking at those projects both by sort of theme and by geography, as requested by this committee. We do have an assessment framework so that we know the scoring system, so that is all in place. And I also just wanted to say, I suppose as a voice of common sense, we have that, obviously we've set out the timescale. We do already have 13 expressions of interest. I think I have to say that if we get absolutely overwhelmed by numbers, there is an issue that we may not be able to hit the timescales that we're talking about. I have said that in the webinars that we've given. We are going to move heaven and earth to achieve that, but I do also want to say that there is a risk that we may have to, if we have 80 applications, if all the expressions of interest were eligible and we had 80 applications, it just might simply not be possible to get all of the appraisals and scoring done, get to that February committee and then through then. So we will do everything we can, but I think I need to be open with you as a committee that is a risk, but we will do our best to manage it. Thank you, Chair.
I would add into that at the last committee, we asked for the forward agenda to have an item maybe in June or July about reflecting on that opportunity fund, because I think it was Councillor Goodall who suggested, if this has proved to be a really productive way to get climate action moving in our local communities, perhaps we need to think about allocations in the future.
So, note on the point of being openness, I'm very pleased to hear, and obviously read the feedback of how much you've been involved, but I have to confess that yesterday I spent a lot of time posting on a lot of residents groups across the whole of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough links to this, so you might get another final flood of kind of interest, because I was so determined, but I was very impressed by what you've managed to achieve. Taking that on and making that point, I think it's kind of, you've articulated, and obviously Lara, we're in a budget setting process. And if there really, really is some really good stuff that's coming through as articulated, we need to be thinking about it. I would want to know, and it would be something that I think we should be taking to the board to extend, if we've got 1 million, but we actually think there is, partly because you've got so many, how many good. Now, I'm saying this off the cuff because we have to make decisions, hard decisions about budgets. But if if you're giving us feedback saying this is the community engaging in wanting to take part in climate action, we partly because we wouldn't have met by then, but if part of the budget setting process, we need to know about that sooner rather than later, and maybe even make a guess saying, you know, we're going to need more than we're going to need a bigger boat. That's the old adage, you know, we're going to need 1.5 million. And that has to be sort of, if that's a recommendation from you as an officer team, then please let us be known at the budget setting process, because as we move forward, I know we're on a consultation, but we can amend the budget towards the final decision making process. So just can I throw that in? And I know my finance team will just have a real, oh God, he's doing it again.
Well, I would say at our last meeting, Councillor Goodall mentioned a 2 instead of a 1.
Well,
you mentioned a 1.5, but yeah. So I remember that. So
I'm just saying, is it something that we should be kind of from this committee?
Yes.
Recommending to myself as Met and the board, if this is particularly something that we see.
I feel like once we have finished the expressions of interest and we have an idea of the scale of eligible applicants, that would lead us to.
I mean, it's a difficult decisions may need to be made, you know, but if we have got capital that's not being spent and we want to kind of, and if that's the sort of narrative, then that, you know, I think we should be thinking about it. Like, you should individually be speaking to your leaders about it, but also speaking to the board. Let's just.
Judith?
Thank you. So 2 points to make on that. I think that when we set the £1 million level for this particular fund, I think we wanted to do 2 things. One, learn from it, which I think is already happening, which is really positive. And then sort of decide to shape what goes forward from here. So I think that probably was built into the initial thinking. The other thing I can say is there is capital for climate in later years in the MTFP. So what now is about is how are we going to use that? Now, obviously, some of the decisions we're taking now are having an impact on that climate, because obviously some on that climate budget, because some of the things we're agreeing now are going to be delivered later. So they're actually out to future years spend, and obviously there's also an issue about if we're not spending all this year's capital, moving that capital into next year. So we have got some scope. Again, that's in the master spreadsheet, which again I am seeing to my left. So what we need to do is ensure that, again, the budget and performance paper reflects all of that, so that you can see that, and you can see the spend that's forecast not only for this year but for next year going forward, and then we see the scope that we've got in order to do this, and indeed the pressures that we've got of other projects that might be coming forward. So absolutely, I think that's a really important discussion to learn from what we're doing and also to plan for the future. So thank you.
So Tierney?
No, this isn't going to be popular, Chair, but can I just point out that if you haven't spent all your money, another option is not to spend it and not to raise the council tax so much. It's an option. We shouldn't be ignored. Thank you.
I think the pots of money that we're talking about are capital. And so our ability to move that capital back into revenue is difficult, but not impossible legally. So I think it's important that if there is a capital pot sitting there, that as a local member, I want to make sure it gets to local people as fast as it can. That's really important. And I think we've seen some success in some of those areas. Yeah, that would be a revenue. Go ahead.
Hate to do this, but the quickest way to put the money in the hands of local people is not to take it from them in the first place. That's the quickest way.
Right. So the capital pots that we're talking about were funded by central government to the combined authority. That's where the money came from. And so our responsibility is to make sure that the residents of Fenland are getting as much possible effect of it as possible, as quickly as possible, at getting back to them from these capital pots. I'm going to move us on in the interest of time to agenda item 11, which is the Maxine, and I just call it the hub because it's a mouthful. Yes, thank you, Maxine. Could you turn on your mic, Maxine?
It's on.
Okay, thank you. And we seem to have tech working too. So I'm here today to give an overview of the Greater South East Net Zero Hubs programme, so our different programmes of work, our governance structure and how that works, and sort of the high-level finance of the different programmes that we operate. There is a brief paper, but what I'm going to do is just to talk you through some slides that I've prepared for this session. So if we can go on to the second slide, please. Okay. Thank you. So we have a number of MOUs with the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. Our core work is funded through Net Zero Strategy, and that directorate has set us 5 key objectives. The first one being to attract commercial investment into a pipeline of projects. And the reason that that is so important is that there is just not enough public funding to enable the transition to net zero. We are going to need billions of funding. So it's about developing project pipelines and attracting that commercial finance into those projects. We provide early stage feasibility and concept development work to increase the number, the quality and scale net zero projects being delivered across our region. We collaborate with DESNZ on a number of other net zero elements. So to date, that's included things like 3 ports, dispersed industrial clusters, looking at SME programs. So there are various things that we work with other departments as well as Net Zero Strategy on. To support a national knowledge transfer programme. So we, on behalf of all of the hubs, manage what is a Net Zero Go. It's a one-stop shop platform. It has various sort of information, shared resources from local authorities, peer-to-peer forums. If you're working on a project with consultants, they can come in and have access to certain parts of that platform. That's really sort of one of the key things that we have been developing over the last 2 years and continue to develop. It's something that's got about 2/3 of local authorities using it, and that use is going up. And sort of finally, the last objective is to raise awareness of the opportunities and benefits of local net zero investment. We have some local authorities that we would call an investor authority. They want to co-fund energy projects in their regions, and we have others that are what would say the non-investing authorities. So they might be looking at concession models or other different business plans by which to bring those projects forward. Just as a quick, here we've got a quick map of the area and just some key headlines. We're one of 5 hubs. We're the largest hub. We have around about 46% of the population, 148 local authorities and just over 10 million households. As I've said, funded by Department of Energy Security and Net Zero. Cambridgeshire and Peterborough has been our combined authority since we were formed in 2018, and we sit in the Place and Connectivity Directorate. We're going to move on to some of our key priority support areas. There's a lot of information on that, and it looks like it's getting smaller, but this is also in your pack. So broadly, we've got power generation. That's looking at local renewable energy. That could be solar farms. Now it could be things like onshore wind, battery storage, heat and buildings. So that we are sort of mainly focused on the public sector estate. So we don't have a remit to work with businesses or commercial. So when we say public sector decarbonisation, we're talking local authorities, blue light services, universities, schools, academy trusts. And also heat networks. So heat networks using the public sector is what we would call an anchor load. So getting that commercial case, but also villages and decarbonisation of smaller towns, and also private heat networks. So most heat networks at this point in time are privately owned. Transport, we support with EV charging, fleet depots. So we do the physical depot decarbonisation, but also looking at what we've called big engines, for want of a better word. So big engines are looking at waste fleet, buses and so on. So looking at decarbonisation opportunities. We've run a number of innovation exchanges with the Knowledge Transfer Network. So that's bringing problem statements from the public sector into a forum where we're looking at SMEs and established companies to innovate and provide solutions. We've had a number of projects go into commercial investment from that route. Car parks, that's things like car parks and solar canopies. Domestic retrofit, you're aware of the retrofit that we have delivered. I'm not here to talk about that today, but I think just to say we are looking at what our space should be in the domestic retrofit world, and that's probably more likely to be looking at holistic whole place retrofit, being that capacity, capability support, looking at facilitation, peer-to-peer networks of learning and so on, and to do that over the whole region rather than just working with a small sort of select of authorities. Community, we run the Community Energy Fund, and we also have 5 local energy advice demonstrators, which is peer-to-peer support for households looking to decarbonise their home. Financing local net zero, so this is an area of work that we really are expanding on. We provide some funding. We've launched an investment readiness grant of 750k for public sectors to bid into to get their projects to investment readiness, attracting finance, financial innovation and business models and guides. A lot of this is coming through our local net zero accelerator program. And finally, resources, hub guides. We provide various toolkits, data sets and so on. I'm not going to dwell on our activities other than to say all of the above that I've spoken about, but we do administer funding. We are looking to develop a data information service. We do project feasibility, early concept support with strategy. Work in the past year around Cambridgeshire, so we've supported public sector decarbonisation applications. We've done a resource centre and a library. We've done work with the Blue Lights, and that's looking across their estate on building and transport decarbonisation, and also looking at solar investment. So many have land holdings, so looking at renewable energy opportunities there. We've funded the further development of IRENES, which is a land map and renewable energy opportunity tool. That's Anglia Ruskin and University of East Anglia. That is available to all our local authorities. But you can also add into that layering, it exists, things like land use. It's all about getting those projects in the places that are right for your area rather than where someone else might deem them to be right. We've done work with CBCA on fleet decarb and also hydrogenated vegetable oils workshop, and that's really a transition fuel going into moving to electrification. We've had a number of community energy fund applications, and across the region we're continuing to have supported a lot of our local authorities to do the round 4 for the capital funding for public sector estates. To date, we've done about £100 million worth of PSDS funding and also unblocked about £79 million worth of projects, and that's mainly grid constraint issues. We've just published the first phase of our industrial clusters report. That's looking at small industrial clusters across the region. A number have been identified in the CPCA region. From that, we're then going to move into a tool that will be interactive where authorities can go on and look at what that energy demand is. So what we can start to do is to plan the projects that are dealing with energy reduction, but also making sure that energy produced close to point of use if we're looking at local opportunities. Transport hub studies, so these are looking at big strategic sites for big energy infrastructure that is needed for the electrification of transport. And one has been identified around the Peterborough region, that's now being further worked up. And we do an awful lot of work around heat networks, so currently working with East of England in this region around using their sites for heat anchor loads. Future work. I think one thing that I'm going to just say is really important is around local area energy planning. Peterborough has one, Cambridgeshire has one in development. This is really important in light of new policies. So we have got the 2030 clean power mission. That means by 2030, government wants to see 95% of our grid using clean power. We've got a national energy system operator set up and regional energy strategic planners. They're going to be setting out the strategic plan of what energy where and what infrastructure where. Your LEAP and the work that you do to develop that can feed into that RESP and actually feed into the that development being in the place that's right for the combined authority. Quickly touch on governance. we've got a hub board. Underneath our hub board, we've got 4 regional advisory boards that are made up of stakeholder groups. We have a funding panel for any of the grants that we run. We also have a retrofit program board. As you know, we feed into this committee and the combined authority. By all means, if you have any questions on that slide, do ask me. We've also got the roles and responsibilities outlined. And I just want to quickly final point is to look at our budget. So in that budget column is the amount of revenue we have in to run the teams. In the pipeline value, that's the revenue. That's the capital value of those pipelines. So for example, net zero capacity support, you'll see an asterisk there. That's 753 million in our shortlist pipeline for 32 live projects. You won't see that on our balance sheet. That is on the balance sheet of our local authorities. Our requirement is to have a leverage of £6 to every £1 that's spent on us. So you can see we are hitting that, which is a Treasury requirement. I will finish there to take any questions. Sorry, I've tried to get that through as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Maxine. I'll start off with one question. At our last meeting, this committee delegated authority to you to investigate the new government's warm home scheme and whether that was a fit for the combined authority or not. Can you give us an update on presenting that to board and what happened?
Yes, so we are not going to be proceeding with the Warm Homes local grant. We did the risk report, which we came to this committee with. That risk is too high. There are still a lot of complexities and unknowns within the scheme. We have supported the majority of those local authorities to join other consortia or to form consortia themselves. So the impact in the region should not be too significant in terms of access to that funding. Go ahead.
Yes, and Maxine and I worked very closely together on the decision that the committee took to review, and we discussed it as well with Bridget as the chair of this committee. And on receipt of the risk assessment, we felt that because the scheme, the Warm Homes local grant, the scheme terms are quite similar to the HUG2 scheme, which has obviously proved difficult in many places to deliver. And therefore, we then made because the receipt of the report was, as I recall it, about the day, if not the day before, of the board. In discussion with Bridget, we felt that we should report to the board the outcome of that decision and then feedback to you how that had passed. In parallel to that, because of our concerns about the design of the scheme and whether it would indeed achieve this committee's desire for retrofit, the Mayor sent a letter to the Secretary of State to reflect some of those issues as well. I'm not aware if a response has been received to that letter yet, but I just wanted to reassure the committee that that was done in conjunction with the chair and that the Mayor has taken that action to follow up as well.
Could I ask that members of the committee also receive a copy of the letter so we can have sight of that as well? So Maxine, my next question is, so if we have residents who are interested in the Warm Home scheme in our areas, where should they go? Are there any other questions for Maxine? That's a good Earl.
Just got a statement. Could I take this opportunity to flag up that the district councils have also had a HUG2 program going, which has been very successful. And in fact, within the United Kingdom, it's one of the best in the country. And they've met all their targets by March, or they will meet all their targets by March. And they've worked collaboratively with each district and with the contractors in delivering this. So could we make put of thanks in the minutes for all the officers at the district councils who worked together to do this within Cambridgeshire?
I would agree. And I think we have on our forward-looking agenda a request for a presentation from Action on Energy, who would really be able to summarize that cooperative working across all the districts and what they've been able to achieve so far. Because we have this interesting situation of we have the Net Zero Hub, who's associated with the combined authority, but doesn't look after our geographic area. It's unusual. Any other questions for Maxine? Thank you very much. So we'll move on to item 12, the budget and performance report. Tim is going to join us. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Chair. First thing I'd like to address is there are a couple of queries that came up as a result of the last monitoring report that went to committee. The first was on the naming of the project. I don't think rewilding was something that was familiar to the committee. I'd just like to confirm that that project is also known as Sustainable Land Use Advice. So hopefully that's something that's more familiar to you. The other query was on the Nature and Investment Fund, the fact that at June, none of the budget had been spent with an expectation that £1 million would be spent by the end of the year. I can tell you now that as at September, half of the budget, 500,000, has been spent, but also the project has been reprofiled. There's now an expectation that the other half of that project will slip into financial year 25-26 to allow partners to appraise and approve larger biodiversity projects. If I pick out the highlights of the variances, on the revenue front, 3 projects are expected to slip into the following financial year, those being Future Fens, Non-Statutory Spatial Plan and Sustainable Infrastructure. Capital Programme, another 3 projects will expect to slip: Huntingdonshire Biodiversity for All, Logan's Meadow, and the aforementioned Nature and Investment Fund. Thank you.
Do members have questions for Tim? Right, I'll throw in a question then. So Tim, we have 3 projects where significant amounts of revenue is going to be reprofiled into a future year. Perhaps this is a question for Judith and Adrian. Can we identify what the barriers were to completing those projects within the year that they were budgeted for? So we've got the Future Fens, non-statutory spatial plan, and then especially the Sustainable Infrastructure project, which had 400,000 in revenue associated to it in the current year.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. So the first project you referenced, the Future Fens, we did make an allocation of funding, but we have an ongoing discussion with our colleagues at the Future Fens about actually whether our services would be more useful to them as a kind of convening and facilitating role rather than a cash role, because they do indeed get some funding from Anglian Water and the Environment Agency. And I think we need to be really clear about the value add. And if indeed that money isn't used for that activity, then in answer to Councillor Day earlier, in terms of like projects coming forward from local authorities that absolutely align to the Climate Change Action Plan, that might be an example of some money that may or may not be available back into the pot, in effect, to be reallocated. In terms of the other 2 funds, so the Non-Statutory Spatial Plan and the Sustainable Infrastructure funds, they were used to so part of the non-statutory spatial plan work was used to pay Stantec for the infrastructure delivery framework, and then, as we've discussed, we are now looking at developing a pipeline of projects that would deliver on those infrastructure constraints. Now, you may recall that we were originally anticipating, certainly when I came into post, that the infrastructure delivery framework was going to be complete, I think, sort of May, June time. It wasn't, and then it was slightly and then the impact of the election meant we had to kind of reposition that work. So indeed, that report only landed up being agreed by the board in November. So therefore, we haven't used that money in line with what we originally thought. It's basically going back to do that work. What it also does is give us some capacity then to make sure that the work we want to do on the sustainability of the local growth plan can be done alongside it. So it will continue to be used for those purposes, but it's effectively slipped because of the delay to the infrastructure delivery framework.
So the report in front of us is for Q2, and I suppose I have a concern that there's an assumption made sometimes that if the revenue has not been spent, that the project is reprofiled, when perhaps by the Q3 we might know better. Reprofiling is not the correct answer. A rethink about what the value of the project and whether that continues to be the case. That would be helpful the next time this report comes to us. Any other questions from members? Okay, so that item is just to note. There's no vote required. Thank you very much, Tim. Item 13 is our work program. Does anyone have any comments on the work program? We've spoken throughout the agenda about a couple of different things that we would like to see in that program going forward. No. Okay. So the date of our next meeting is Wednesday, the 29th of January at 10 a.m. in this room again, although the mayor has to explore the idea of somehow coinciding with the Fenland soil meeting. So we will communicate if that changes at all, but for now it's the 29th of January in this room. Councillor Tierney.
It seems that the location of the meeting is seldom available on the website until the very last minute. And I've emailed a couple of times asking where and had no response. And it was only last night when it changed and appeared on there that I found out where to go. I know it's going to be this one next time now, but I think perhaps the website could be updated a little more promptly.
A lot of meeting changes.
Councillor Dupre.
Could I try a radical solution to try and address that for January, which is, as we have just heard, that will be the 29th, which I believe is day 2 of your Fen Soil Conference, which a number of us might want to attend. And I wonder whether, in order to maximise the potential for us to attend the Fenland Soil Conference, it might be possible to move the venue of the January meeting to Ely.
Yes. So that's what we're going to explore, whether that's possible and who might want to host us. But so let's assume it's what's in the agenda for now, and then we'll email if we are able to accommodate that and move it so we can all enjoy the Fenland Soil meeting as well. Right, it's 1 o'clock. I'm right on time. Thank you all for joining us.